Well, we just put out a few episodes on green tree pythons, so we might as well discuss the other iconic green snake in the reptile sphere, and that is the Emerald Tree Boa. Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and this is the podcast that explores the ethics of the captive management of reptiles, amphibians, and other animals through the lens of biological science, conservation, and human nature. Joining me on the podcast today is Zion McAndrews, who is the creator of emeraldtreeboas.org, and this website is the most thorough resource for emerald tree boas on the internet, and he has accumulated a ton of information from many different well-respected resources and put it all into one place. Whether you want to talk about keeping northern emerald tree boas or Amazon Basin emerald tree boas, everything is in there, and this podcast goes into a ton of depth, everything from the importation process, what do you do with an imported animal, Zion's own journey with keeping emerald tree boas, the mistakes he made early on, how he rectified those mistakes. Of course, we discuss husbandry. We spend quite a lot of time discussing health issues with emerald tree boas. Of course, many of you are probably well aware that chronic regurg is a common problem in this species. We discuss some of the theories about why that is and how to solve it, or potential ways we can solve it in the future. And again, I think it's the most thorough episode I've ever done on emerald tree boas. It's probably one of the most thorough podcast episodes out there on emerald tree boas. And I know Zion will want me to make sure I say that is not all information from him. He is a reservoir almost for information from the community. His project is a bunch of information that he has collected and people have given it to him. And of course, some of his experience as well is this giant accumulation of knowledge that he's been able to put down onto one website. And we're able to kind of get through a ton of that on today's episode. I think there's so much more to talk about with Zion as well in the future, and we will do that again at some point later. But for now, enjoy this very, very detailed episode on the other green snake in the reptile sphere, the emerald tree boa. This episode is brought to you by ZooMed Laboratories. If you are currently looking for a cleaner lighting solution for your reptile enclosure, then I highly recommend checking out ZooMed's ReptiSun LED UVB Combo Hood. This hood combines visible light and UVB light into a single fixture, which, as you know, can really simplify the top of your enclosure. Stick around to later in this episode to find out more about ZooMed's ReptiSun LED UVB Combo Hood. If you are running bioactive setups, then you know your cleanup crew is not optional. It is absolutely essential. Isopods and springtails break down waste, recycle nutrients, and keep your system from crashing. Later on in this episode, I'm going to tell you all about the cleanup crew kits from the BioDude. These kits allow you to culture your own isopods and springtails at home, or you can buy a species-specific kit that is already catered to the specific reptile or amphibian that you're keeping at home. Or if you're somebody who actually loves the look of an isopod, you can buy their premium display kit and display your isopods for everybody to see in your reptile room. Stick around for later on in the episode to learn more about the cleanup crew kits from the BioDude. Well, Zion, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
The timing is good because we are, as you know, we're talking about green snakes in the last couple of episodes, and there's another green tree python episode that'll I think come out before this, which I'm sure will be probably a little bit more more controversial than the conversation we're going to have today. And I have some theories about why that is. We'll talk about that later. But obviously, today is going to mostly center around emerald tree boas, which is another iconic species within herpetoculture, and you have a fantastic website kind of centered around them. But I love to figure out like your journey to keeping emeralds, but also just in reptiles in general. Has this been something that you've always done?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with how I started even keeping animals. So ever since I was a kid, animals, like since I was 4 years old, has been a huge thing in my life. I started out with, actually growing up, I had many pets. I had an iguana, I had 4 chameleons. Now, granted, I look back at the care on those chameleons. This was back in like 2001, 2002. So, and I was also like 6 or 7 years old at the time. So how much influence I had on those chameleons. But looking back at some of those enclosures, actually, I at least had a lot of perching options, and I had thermometers and hygrometers mounted. So I at least was doing that at 7 years old. But so I had that. I had lots of turtles. I had many different types of birds. I had an Amazon parrot. I had 2 cockatiels. I had parakeets. I had lovebirds. I had just many different types of animals growing up throughout my life. And so animals have just always been a big part of everything I've done. Now, I took a break pretty much when I hit like late high school time, and I went into college. I got my degree in electrical engineering, so I wasn't really I didn't have a lot of time for animals. I did live with my dog and my cat at the time, so I did have two mammals. But then I, graduated and did some other stuff before getting into the job I'm at today. And throughout the last like 5 years, five-ish years or so, I kind of 5 years ago I realized, oh wait, I'm like an adult and I can kind of just get back into that again. That doesn't have to be something I just did as a kid. And so, I got back into the hobby with just starting off with like I got a beardy. I got back into my aquariums, and I also got a crested gecko. And then over the course of those many years, I actually went to one of the reptile shops here in Arizona, and my one of my friends who works there, he was like, "Dude, we got an Emerald Tree Boa in," and I was like, "Oh wow, that's crazy!" Because back when I was a kid, I used to read them all in the so. I read a lot as a child, and one of the big things was like this ecology book I had, and it was always of the Amazon rainforest. Everything, if I could emulate the Amazon rainforest as a kid, I would do that. And one of the most iconic species was the Emerald Tree Boa. The way that they had it in like the books, the way that they had it on the covers of things. I mean, it's actually like one of the poster species besides green trees that are used on like expos
Mhm.
and things like that to like get people in. So I it was always a dream, but at the time I was like, this is such an advanced species. I can't get into this. Like I'm not ready. And then, but this Emerald Tree Boa that my friend got into the shop was so just so docile is what I should say. And like I've always heard that they prior to getting involved with them, I always heard that they were the species that is very easy to be defensive. They're going to be nippy and all this kind of stuff. And especially with having 1 to 2 inch fangs, most people are intimidated by that, which I can't blame them. Granted, we do keep dogs and stuff, but that's a
Mhm.
different conversation. Um, so I got him, and I pretty much was. I remember at the time that I got him, I I was doing like as much research as possible. I told him like, "Hey, hold this for me for like 2 weeks while I like try to get the most perfect enclosure set up because this was like a one in a lifetime opportunity here in Arizona." And so I created this enclosure and I set everything up. And I remember that there was not much um, information at the time. So I think so. What kind of drew me into it was big thing was childhood, iconic species, always wanted that species specifically. And then the opportunity came up to where this was like a very feasible thing at the time. And that cascaded in what I'm assuming we'll talk about here in a little bit. But
Mhm.
so it pretty much just boils down to many, many years. I'm 30 now. So we're talking like 25 years of maybe one day I'll own that species, and then it happening in front of me, and now I have to like adapt really quick before I lose this chance.
Yeah, yeah. It's I'm sure it's so true that that species and the green trees as well, but I think even more emerald you see them on like I have this my son has this book, it's a reptile book, and I remember having that book as well when I was a kid. It's obviously a really old book, it's like from the 90s, and the cover is an emerald tree boa, and it was just one of those things that you just always remember. You think that you
Yep.
would never see one in person when you're a kid, like you just don't, it's just one of those things that's
Yeah,
somewhere
it's like
far
a
off into the
phantom
distance.
snake. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I'm sure like when you first received it, was it just bizarre to have one? Like were you just probably constantly staring at the enclosure and just like in disbelief?
Yeah. So when I got him, I before I put him into the enclosure, and I'll share with you like the initial enclosure I made, and the we can talk about the mistakes I made and all that stuff. So when I got him, I remember holding him the day that he came in because I was checking him for like mites and scarring and all this other stuff.
Did you know his
Uh,
background at all? Like was he a captive bred or was he wild caught or
no,
any?
he was a so they say farmed, but I
Okay.
assume wild caught.
And did you know the age?
At the time, no, but looking at it now, I assume he's between like when I got him, I wouldn't be shocked if he was around like 2 to 3.
Okay.
So now, he's probably getting into like if I was like right around that age, I assume he's now maybe like 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
If he was that age, like because I've had him now for 3 or 4 years. So with if I gauge the age correctly, I don't think he was a year old. I think he was a lot bigger than that. But usually when these emeralds come in, they're very skinny like the way that they look a lot more emaciated, so it's kind of hard to tell. And then once you get them to their weight and the way and when they start like truly adapting and trying to thrive in captivity, you then can kind of start gauging the age. And also, it's it's not the only sign to tell their age, but a big thing is the color of them.
Mm.
Usually, sometimes can dictate the age as well. That's not like a foolproof method because sometimes you get these snakes that are like super lime green or they're and then you get these darker ones, but it's typically said that as the snake ages it gets darker and darker and darker, so that's why you see these emeralds that are like 15, 20. They're almost this really dark, like Christmas tree green kind
Yeah.
of versus that young lime citrusy green, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
didn't know his
Yeah.
age at the time, but I'm guessing he was probably like 2 or 3, but I didn't know anything about him. And when I put him into the enclosure, I mean, I was obsessed. I kept walking by and just staring at him, and it's funny because with emeralds, like it's said that they don't move a lot, but when they're not moving and they're just in that like position, it's still such a fantastic thing to see. And I think, but luckily I knew not to like, touch him and get him all. I waited a very long time to finally really start interacting with him just so he would get situated and I wouldn't stress him out. We can get into that later too, but the stress is a big thing, obviously, when they come in. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, I was obsessed. I'll tell you that. I never knew what that was gonna fall into,
Yeah,
I
so
guess.
obviously it unraveled into something much more than just having the one snake. So
Yeah.
why don't we talk about the initial setup? You had said that you had made some maybe small mistakes and things like that. We can talk about how you initially set it up, and then maybe the mistakes that you thought now in hindsight you made.
Right. And so, okay, so I'll add a disclaimer. When you go onto the website and you go into the enclosure section, you're going to see that there are many different ways to keep emerald tree boas. And a lot of that is going to depend. So when I say mistakes, I think it really just comes down to the way I had things set up and not necessarily that one thing is necessarily bad or impossible to do. I think it depends where you live, the setup of your home, the room that it's in, the ambient humidity in your house, and all this different stuff, right? So for me, living in Arizona and also being a person that is just naturally hot, I keep the AC around like 70 to 72, which I think is like 23.
Yeah, it's around like 22, 23. Yeah,
Yeah,
73 and 23 are the same, I think.
Okay, yeah. So off memory, like I think that's around like 20 to 23 C in that gauge. So like obviously with the air running, fighting because right now in Arizona, I think it's 44 C outside.
Yeah.
So I'm fighting the air. That's obviously going to dry out the place and all this kind of stuff. So going into that, what I did is I started off with a dubia enclosure. So I did that because one, ease of the timing and how I had to get it delivered. So at the time I was like, okay, arboreal snake, I'm gonna get a 36-inch tall. I think it was 24-inch wide and 18. It was like their 67-gallon or something like that. And because I didn't want him to be, just exposed or anything like that, I purposely chose against glass. I'm not knocking glass. That is 100% something you can do. But because he was going to be in my living room, and at the time I was like, this is going to be a display snake, and I didn't really know much about, this is also in all fairness as well. This was my first wild caught animal as well, so
Mhm.
I was kind of going through that, and not now I know a lot more about wild caught and importation and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But the so I set up the enclosure. I did a foam background. I put cork to make it look like he was in a like a canopy is pretty much what I tried to do. And I actually bought this huge like piece of wood, and then I zip tied other pieces of wood to make it look like a tree coming out. And then I kind of like, and then I added a bunch of plants and all this different stuff. And so long story short, I tried to emulate a canopy, and I even added PVC pipes, which I gorilla glued at the time. That was the best I had, and so I gorilla glued them on each side, and then so pretty much I try to emulate a canopy setup and try to really encompass everything to try to minimize stress. Now, so it looked cool, and I'll show you pictures of that. Uh, and I used on top, I got a Jungle Dawn LED. I did a jungle, at the time I did a 7% uh, UVB, which we'll talk about that mistake here in a second. But and then I did two different heat sources. So I did a hotspot with a halogen, and I did another a more ambient temp with a deep heat projector, kind of closer to the front, because I knew he was going to perch. So I tried to create an ambient with a hotspot of between like 89 to 93 on the top perch, and then all the way down it would go to about 72 at the very bottom. And so I was able to get in that heat gradient pretty well. And with the plants and all the stuff that I added, I eventually kept adding more, and I was able to add, shaded spots and things like that. So that was what the setup looked like. Now, the mistakes with that was, so with the open top and also the type of heating that I was using at the time, for the next like almost year, I was fighting humidity. That was the biggest problem. So with uh, and these snakes, they can handle some dry out period, but if you can avoid that, and because we can get into this a little bit more also later, but I'm sure that people who are keeping reptiles for a long time realize that just because something's wet doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be like, there's a difference between wetness humidity and then like this true ambient humidity
Yes.
that is staying relatively consistent throughout the enclosure, right? So at the time, at the very, very beginning, I was just doing like these huge spikes, and maybe it would drop to like 60% or things like that. Obviously, as he got down in the enclosure, he would get more humidity at the bottom. But if
Yeah.
he was to go up towards and bask, which I actually did notice he did do, uh, he would not be as humid, and therefore he would dry out. And so I actually did get good sheds. There was only one shed, which I think was the second one I had with him, where it was bad. Like it was like flaking off. And that's when I was like, okay, I got to be on top of this humidity. Like he's giving me that actual response that this is not working. And so what ended up happening there is I ended up waterlogging the soil, and that became a problem. And then because this was a dubia enclosure and I didn't seal it,
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
that was another problem. So there was a lot of issues with this enclosure that I faced, and then obviously due to the waterlogging, like then I did have a cleanup crew in there, and they actually did do a good job, but I'm sure there was still a bunch of bacteria that was in there because of the water. I even had a drainage layer, and it wasn't enough. And so that was pretty much all waterlogging. And then the top, I eventually did get it to maintain like 60% at least at the lowest, and then I'd spike it day and night. But I was just fighting this water dripping constantly. So I had to get like a pan and all this stuff because trying to I wasn't trying to like upgrade him yet because it was still a little too soon. And I was also trying to figure out some other things financially at the time. So I was like, so that, with all that being said, so humidity was a big problem. The water falling out of the enclosure was a big problem. The gradient wasn't that bad. I also, I guess I didn't comment on this yet, was the size of the enclosure. I think in hindsight, we think of these snakes to be just arboreal, and that's not wrong to think. They do spend a lot of their time perched. I mean, I'm in my office right now, but I have three emeralds by me that are in quarantine, and granted they're in quarantine tubs, but they do remain perched. But at nighttime, if it's depending on the scenario, right? Like it could be they're looking for food, maybe they're just trying to enrich themselves, maybe they're if they smell female or male nearby, all these different things can add up, and they actually do end up stretching out and going onto the ground and moving around, right? So I did notice he would do that sometimes, and I didn't understand that behavior at first. And at first I thought something was wrong because why would this arboreal snake be on the ground? But they do like to stretch out. And so I knew that on the next enclosure, I would also value the width or the
Mhm.
length of the enclosure
Yeah.
uh, a lot more. So I think the enclosure size was another thing. And also, we'll get into this more too as well, but the type of heating and UVB I used. I actually think that at the start, because I'd used a fresh jungle or forest Arcadia 7% bulb, which we'll get into. This is more of a controversial thing is UVB on arboreals. We'll talk about that. But I believe I did give him a slight UVB burn. It was very minuscule. It was just this darkening right on the back of the neck.
Mhm.
And once that happened, I turned it off, and I did provide a lower UVB bulb. Now, granted, this is mounted outside of the enclosure, so I have the I'm forgetting the name, the UVB reader where
Yeah,
it
yeah, the
measures
solar meter. Yeah.
yes, the soul meter, thank you. And at the top perch, I was reading like 1.2 to 1.8. So it wasn't extreme or anything like that, but I'll explain why I think that happened a little bit later. And so I think just there was a lot of compared to having what I had in the past, where it was, a lot of arid or more lizards, because with snakes, I had a ball python prior, a corn snake prior, but these are more terrestrial species. And, even UVB for them is still something heavily debated and talked about. So when you're getting into these arboreals, which are getting closer and closer and closer to that, those heat sources. So I think all that combined, granted, he ate for me. He thrived. I was able to get the sheds in. He was hydrated. I still just didn't like the way that it wasn't dialed in, if that makes sense.
Yes. I think that's like a perfect setup. It's funny. Probably every old school keeper is like, haha, that's why we don't want to keep like that because, there's
Right.
all these mistakes but it's a good learning curve. And
Right.
it allows that platform for you to figure out things that work and things that don't. And then we can, progress from there. And so I want to dwell on this and kind of the progression of how this worked, but maybe quickly, just really briefly, because we'll get into this deeper. But maybe can you give people a picture of how many you're caring for now, just to so we can kind of get to the end of the story and just give people to say how much experience you do have now, and then we're going to dial back to all that progression that you went through. But I would love to make sure the listeners are aware of like what capacity you're working with them at this point.
So yeah, and we'll one of the snakes that I have now, we'll talk a little bit about more. So right now I believe I have 7 adults and 1 baby. And the baby's new because I just recently, well, new within 2 months, is I really wanted to have hands-on experience working with the juvenile for because you guys will see that I have a basin section on the website, and I actually don't own basins, but a lot of what is written on the website is a very huge collaborative effort. So despite me not owning basins, I worked with a lot of basin keepers to formulate what's up, and we'll go more into that. But right now I'm at 7 emeralds, and uh, all of them are adults. All of them are imports. We'll talk more about importation later, except the baby. The baby is captive bred and born. Um, that one is in a different area of the house, and so they're all. I've had to go through many horror stories with these emeralds, but and we'll explain that a little bit later. But at the moment, 7. But at this time, it's been about 4 or 5 years caring for emeralds in general, and just. But one of the big things has been the not only the experience of keeping them, but also the community as well. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
since it is a very small community, you get to know the big names very, very quickly, and just all the different types of information you'll get, which is what inspired this. Well, on top of the fact that when I first got my first emerald, my only resource, I guess this is important to say, at the time when I got him 4 years ago, the only resource I was able to get was calling Amy from Happy Basins, and she was nice enough to hop on a phone call with me because there was just jarring differences all over the internet. I mean, like I tried to find things, and it would always. This is another thing. There was always a conflation of like you'd look up an emerald thing and it would give you green tree python care, and
Yeah.
so I was always like stress about, am I doing this right? Right. So,
Yeah.
and, I obviously tried to do the best I could at the time. And, what started this website was I kind of realized like there's probably other people that are going through that. So why don't I work with a bunch of people and help facilitate this? So
Yeah, yeah, and it's good to mention Amy. She's like the queen of emeralds at this point, and she was not afraid to do things differently. If anybody knows Amy, she cares for her emeralds in a totally different way than the convention, and she's really done a lot of work to disprove the nippy, bitey, aggressive nature that was commonly thought of with this species. And unlike many people, she has boots on the ground experience in South America looking for these animals in the wild. So she's a fantastic resource, and it's great to hear that you've connected with her. And I'm sure she has a lot of her knowledge has been baked into the website as well that you put together. So I'm just trying to think of what the best way forward to continue, because I want to know about your progression into obviously working with this one and improving some of those. But maybe before we do that, let's lay out just the landscape with the species. You'd mentioned basins and northerns, or maybe we could just lay that out for people. Let's start with that before I throw too many questions at you.
yeah, no, for sure. I think that is a good place to start. So, okay. So you're going to see that on the website, there is a tab called Emerald Tree Boa species, and it's pretty much going to break down two of the different types. We have our northern emeralds, and these are the more in the hobby, you're going to see these as the imported wild caughts. These are going to be the ones that have the traditional lightning bolt kind of white markings on the body. You can find them in something called an anaconda phase or reduced pattern, where that white goes away and they can be completely green or black or other forms. There's not a lot of I don't like saying there's not a lot of variety, because that's not true. But as far as like, I guess when you compare to green tree pythons, there's not a lot of like these designer
Variation,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah. But there is differences. Don't get me wrong. I know that sometimes it's like, oh, it's just green snake, but you can find some very amazing. I think there's like 10 high yellow northerns that have been seen. I know Ron St. Pierre was one that had them, and I believe Keith Flax also has a granite northern, which is this very like it's like speckled black in this way that's like marbled. It's very beautiful. So you have your northerns, which are our Corallus caninus, if for the Latin name, and then we have our Amazon basins, which are going to be our larger species. These are ones that are not imported, with a star on there. So there is imports of Amazon basins, but I believe it's very, very select people. It has pretty much been illegal since, I believe, the 70s. I could be wrong on the exact date there. It could be late 70s or early 80s that it has been illegal to import basins, specifically from Brazil and other parts of South America. So that's actually a big reason why the Amazon basin price is so high compared to your northerns, because most of the basins that you're going to be getting within the US, or even if you're importing them from Europe or the UK, are going to be established bloodlines. There is a few, I believe there's a few people that have permits to export basins from their captive bred farms from South America. But once again, that is maybe like, I would be shocked if there's more than people I could count on one hand that can do that. So, but the Amazon basin is going to be larger. You're going to see this animal presented with typically a large connected white dorsal pattern. So it will still have kind of like, this is kind of where you get into the textbook basin, from my understanding, is you have a long white dorsal, and then you kind of have these little notches coming out the side, opposed to this lightning bolt. But there's because actually early on when I was learning about basins and the different types of variations that are presented, we have I would say the godfather of basins is Ed Marino. And so he has, through years and years of him producing Amazon basins, has produced absolutely amazing, beautiful animals that have huge variations. I mean, so instead of having those little notches, you get these like barbed wire notches, you get these diamond notches. He's been able to even get these frosted snowflake, which is the whole back is just doused in white. And I'll send you images of that. And so you'll see these high white basins, but those are pretty much in captivity where we have been able to produce those, and specifically a lot of that is thankful to Ed Marino. So opposed to the northerns, which you'll see present a lot more with the reduced patterns or the standard white. But there is a line, actually. There is, I believe, the only line of northerns is the Miss Willie line, which that one, if you're ever buying a Willie line, buy it from a trusted source, because you will be able to tell if it's a Willie line, because it will have a lot of white on it. It'll look like these big blotches. So I do know some people that have the line confirmed, but just something to be careful of for any buyers out there if they're ever looking for a high end northern. So that's the main thing. And then obviously going into their geographic location, the northerns are spread out through the northern part of South America. So you're going to see them, in Colombia, Brazil. The main areas that we're going to be importing from is going to be Suriname and the Guyana Shield. That's the areas that they pretty much conquer. Now, of course, there is debate on some overlap on how these species intermingle. And what I mean by that is do they cross into each other's? But it's very heavily seen that typically the Amazon basins do stay near the basin aspect of the Amazon, and they're against the river. So that they typically stay there, and they don't typically go up into the aspects of the north part of South America. But I haven't been there personally, and from what it seems that outside of farms and all that, if you really want to go see the basins, you do have to go into Brazil. And now this is a wild basin, not a farm basin, so you have to be in the river and hopefully see one at night. But for the northerns, it's still actually pretty hard to see them. I know Amy and I believe Dave Kaufman and for Green Room Pythons. I'm blanking on his name. I think it's Bob.
I know. Yeah, I forget. I think
I'm sorry if I forgot his name, but they went down and I believe they did see some northerns, but even they're hard to find sometimes. But they're mainly around that Suriname, Guyana Shield. At least that's where they're being imported from. Now, there is apparently some farms that spread up into Central America. Now, I don't know how readily available we import from there, but I'm not. That's something I'm for sure not sure of. But that is typically the geographic spread between these northerns and these Amazon basin emeralds. And then I think the only other thing I would say is that I guess a big thing that I'll focus on as well is it is thought that these emeralds only spend all their time in the high canopies, but they do come down. And I think that is, and just like I mentioned with the enclosure, seeing my guy cruise the floor, they don't just park forever up there, and they do come down at night. They even may come down during the day. Obviously, they have the freedom to do what they want, but they're able to really just move across all aspects of the rainforest. They may go perch in the daytime and, find a nice, safe place where, they can't be spotted, but they are not just this animal that becomes like a rock, as for lack of a better analogy, that will not come down. And so I think and they're not all the way at the very tippy top either. So I know that was a big misconception. They obviously will go as high as they please, but they truly find niches between that, the I forgot the actual science term, but the mid range to the floor when they need to, right? So, sure. And I'm sure there's some outliers that like to go all the way up. But
yeah. Okay, that's great. I think there's a couple more things I have question wise for this before to set it up even better, and then we can continue on with your story. So my other questions are: so are most of the northerns that we see for sale, are those almost always wild caught imports, or are there enough people now breeding that there are some captive, like you said, your juvenile is captive? I think we see people breeding them sometimes, but my guess is it's few and far between.
So one thing I was going to do at the end was I wanted to shout out a lot of the people that were part of this and have been so supportive. And so I'll semi do that right now in a way as well
Sure, sure.
with your question. So the first thing is, yes, there are breeders, but I'll start with the wild caughts first. So here's what I'll say. If you are buying an emerald from a shop, from an expo, from Morph Market, I would say there's a high chance you're getting an import. Now, if there's these specific sellers and also the condition of the animal, because there's not so many breeders, at least within the US, and I actually, speaking of Canada, there's not a lot of breeders in Canada that are doing captive bred. I know this because I have a bunch of people from Canada constantly asking me, do I know any? And I do know one that just had a litter. I think he only has 6 babies right now. We'll talk about him in a bit, but the high chance you're getting an import, and the reason is because one, they're more affordable, and what I mean by that is like I guess everybody has a different perspective on that, but the typically an import will cost between 4 to 1,000 in US, $400 to 1,000 in US, and so with that price range, you're actually not going to see that much this year, and the reason is because there actually is a huge decrease in importation this year. So you're actually seeing a lot of imports coming in at 1,200, 1,400, and now we're crossing into the pricing of what some of these captive bred babies are actually going into, which is typically a range for a baby can be anywhere between 1,300 US to about like 2,200 US, and then you get into the Willie line, which I believe gets into 3 to 5,000 for US dollars. So specifically talking about northerns. So you're going to probably encounter that just due to the shop being able to get those imports in, being able to sell them for prices that, aren't, someone might look at a baby and go like that little thing. Cause my captive bred baby, I mean, it's literally like the size of my finger right now. And so, someone may look at that size of the snake and go like 1,500. That's preposterous. And also, with the fact that babies are so fragile compared to the adults, right? And you spend that, and then if you do something wrong, it may pass and all that stuff. So yeah, you will probably encounter that. Way more common than you're going to encounter a captive bred, at least at a random shop or random expo or something like that. You may get lucky. I mean, maybe in places like Florida where I expect there to be, well, when I say that, you may get captive born animals, but that not necessarily means captive born and bred. So, and for anyone who doesn't know, that just means that, a gravid female could have come in on a shipment and then she, had her litter. And then technically speaking, those babies are captive born because they were born in captivity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same quality as a captive born and bred because the parents would have been housed the difference is the stable environment is
right.
Really
yes. Yeah.
So going into breeders, and shout out to all the breeders that are out there doing their work on this. I have a page on the emeraldtreeboas.org. It's emeraldtreeboas.org/breeders. And currently, that's not every breeder in existence, but the ones that I've been able to make contact with are, and we've worked together to, with their consent to be featured. So you can always go on there and just click one of the images and it redirects you to their profile or something like that. And one of the big breeders, shout out to Chris Rice at Snake Spirit. He is alongside Ed Marino. He's a long-standing Emerald Tree Boa breeder. He is phenomenal at his craft. He's been doing a great job, and he's truly been a huge pioneer alongside Ed and some of the other names on having captive bred babies, especially northerns. Ed is very well known for his basins. Chris is very well known for his northerns, especially he has some very beautiful anaconda face emeralds. So I always recommend, reaching out to Chris Rice. But pretty much if you're going to get a captive born baby, the names are going to be pretty well known at this point. So, and no knock to people who are just getting out there and getting started, right? Like I I commend you guys, and you may not be well known. This may be your first litter, so feel free to contact me, and I can get you on here. But you have many different people like Mile High Arboreals, Rebel Rouser Reptiles, Mojo Herpetoculture, and for the people in Europe, you got Millennium Reptiles. Lee Warren is a fantastic emerald breeder. He's been doing it for 30 years. You got Andy Corbin and many, many others that are Legacy Reptiles, I believe, and Mike's Monitor in the US. So there are very well established breeders here. And I think just taking the time to, be sure of what you're going to want, what route you want to get into. If you want the lowest stress possible, please go captive bred. I cannot stress the potential stress you may go through with an import. It is possible, but it's for sure not for everybody.
Okay, that's a really good advice. And just on top of that, we will get into some of the import advice for people that yes. Might be curious and trying to go down that route. But right. Just from an overview, and then I want to get back into your story. From like a bird's eye view of working with either of the two species or just in general, what type of person should want what I'm trying to ask this question, like who should keep an emerald, like what are some of the factors that might rule out somebody wanting an emerald? Because everybody looks at one and goes, wow, I would love to keep one, that looks amazing, but there's always a few things that might go, that maybe it's not for me after I learned that one or two facts. So what are some key factors that can make someone decide whether or not this is the right species for them?
Okay, so first thing is I'll say that anybody who wants to keep one and is dedicated to learning the proper like husbandry and being patient with them, by all means go ahead. But if for sure you're trying to think of how I want to word this too, because so here's a good example. Like Amy has her jungle room, and her emeralds for events are handled, and she does a great job of letting them free roam and all this different stuff, which is fantastic. And I'm sure as she did that, these animals got used to this, and Amy being able to work with these species for so long is able to read the body language of them and understand, when an animal is too stressed, maybe it's not best for an event or something like that. So with all that being said, that is possible, but I would say that if someone is going to go into this, okay, actually, you know what? This is what I want to say. If you're going to go into Emerald Tree Boa keeping, not with a mindset that this is going to be quick, I would say, and by quick, I'll get into that a little bit more, that wouldn't be the species for you. And what I mean by quick, just to define that, is how fast we're going to be working with this animal hands-on, how fast we want this enclosure to be set up, how fast we want this animal to improve or adapt or things like that. This is a species that truly, truly takes its time. And what I mean by that is, like, just to give an example, let's say you have a medical issue with one of your emeralds, just for an example. And this animal is going to go, whether it's internal or external, there's going to be shed cycles that it has to go through to heal external injuries. And this is amongst all snakes, but a lot with them is that, and if it's internal, you have to go off the fact that these animals eat maybe once, depending on prey size, once every 2 to 4 weeks. So, like if something goes wrong one feeding, we're waiting almost a month for the next feeding. And, we're not trying to just speed run past this, and the getting an enclosure dialed in takes time, and that the humidity actually maintaining itself, and the way that the emerald actually even interacts with its environment. I was actually speaking to someone about this who she loves corn snakes, and I love corn snakes. I have 2 myself, and any long-term snake keeper will see that every species has a different tongue flick, right? Like, yeah. and the rate of that. And so something that I noticed with emeralds, and other Emerald Tree Boa keepers may agree with me, is that they're very methodical with the way that they navigate things. Like their tongue flick speed, I would say, is like a tenth of a corn snake, right? You got corn snakes that are it almost looks like they're, running like 70 milli or not 70 milli, 70 cans of caffeine, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
but an emerald, their fastest tongue flick is still not even close to the slowest of a corn, right? So I think just being very patient and not being very like hasty with them is a big thing, and being okay to be hands off as well. So,
Mm.
every emerald I've had, I've handled, free handled. I'm not telling anyone else to do that. I understand the risks that I take when I do that, but I'm not telling anybody to go shove their hand in front of an emerald tree boa or something like that. But I free handled all of them with no hook or anything like that. And I think a lot of that just comes down to being as patient as possible with them. Now, of course, I'm human. I may make a mistake eventually, and it may backfire on me, but I just do my best to respect them. And so I think really for any keeper who's dedicated to learning the the amount of work that they do require for enclosure setup. So it is not a simple enclosure. You can't. Okay, let me add an asterisk there, because when I say simplistic enclosure, I don't mean like bioactive versus minimal. What I mean simplistic is like you can just put any type of heat and not think about the humidity and the water and all this stuff, like not the actual style of the enclosure,
Mhm.
and just being very patient with them. I think that's the main thing. So if you're looking for like, I don't even want to say if you're looking for like a bearded dragon, because I think that even paints them in a bad light. Like I think your animal really tells you the way that they want to interact with the world.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think just being very understanding that this animal is not there as like a toy, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great answer. Just the element of patience is, and
Yes.
I think many people, if they're honest with themselves, maybe they don't have the patience and they want to work with animals that are fast moving and they're quick to, and they can, whatever it is. But if you're
Right.
somebody that can handle that slower process, which can be pretty stressful for some people, like if you are somebody that likes to be fast paced and maybe like an ADD ADHD situation, like that might not be the best situation for you, because you're constantly wanting to improve something, and really what that animal might need is just time. It might need 6 months to just settle in. And one element that's great about what you're doing is because you live in Arizona, so you live in a dry climate. So as far as
Yeah.
your natural climate, it probably couldn't get worse. And
Yeah.
trying to keep like a humid rainforest species. And I deal with humidity issues as well, because I live in a very dry climate too. So it's nice to hear that you didn't say if you live in a dry climate you can't own them. There's
Oh yeah.
ways that we can get around making sure that the habitat is good. Okay, I think that's a great setup. I think that gives people a real good foundation of the two
Can I
different
mention
species.
something really quick
Yeah,
about the
please,
ADD?
please.
Sorry.
Yes.
So funny enough, I'm actually I have ADHD. I am diagnosed, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. So, but one thing I want to just make note is these animals have actually kind of called me out on my impatience.
Mm.
It's because like sometimes like when I want to do something that is like super like because I want to be super hands-on and involved.
Yeah, that's
Granted,
me
I have
too.
other species, so I can kind of do that with them,
Yeah.
but they kind of make me like just as a quick example for anyone listening, like if anyone's ever been like you're spraying the reptile enclosure or you're feeding and you feel like you're just rushing through it and getting through it, and like sometimes I like look at them and it's called me out and kind of been like, why am I so stressed doing this? Like I'm supposed to do this for fun.
Yeah.
And then like seeing them kind of makes me go like, okay, I'm just spraying an enclosure right now. Why am I so like on one? So sometimes like not for everybody, but for me, it's actually been a very funny reflecting mirror of like, hey man, just take a breath, right?
Yeah.
Really quick. Like so it could be helpful for some people that it has they call me out sometimes.
That's such a good thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm like that too. Like I'll be rushing through here, changing waters and spraying things, and then you're like, why am I going like that? And but also like it's probably nice to, it sort of forces you to be patient. So if you're because I'm like that too. I'm just constantly needing to do something, and like right now I'm trying to like fix my lawn because there's weeds and all this, the grass is not nice, and I literally can't stop. Like every day I go out there and I'm doing stuff, and I'm like, this,
Right.
I know this isn't helping. Like I almost went and cut the grass today, even though I know it doesn't need to be cut, because I'm like, it'll probably ruin it because those seeds are barely started to grow, but I just need, I don't know, it's like the
Yeah, I know,
patience
I know what you mean.
yeah,
But
so
but then you have this emerald who just is like he's just chilling, and it's like,
And you're like,
it's
okay,
kind
I
of a
can.
reflection, like, hey, maybe it's not, maybe I don't need to do that today.
Yes, exactly. Okay, that's a great point. Okay, so let's dial back to your journey. So you set it
Okay.
up. You had your first one, the first import, the enclosure. You had it, set up to the best of your abilities. Obviously, as the weeks went on, you noticed that there was issues with lighting and humidity and like leakage
Right.
to the bottom. So
Yeah.
where did you go from there?
So, okay. So, and just so everyone knows, I had the one emerald, specifically just him, for about 2 to 3 years. So, because I really wanted to just, at the time, I wasn't looking to do anything more than that. I really just wanted to put all my time into my dream species, right? And he was it. So I actually had that enclosure for like a year or so. I was just, whatever error I had, I was just fighting it, is honestly
Yeah,
what I was doing. Like, I
tinkering
was,
forever.
yeah, yeah. So, it caused problems. I had a stand, and it rotted the stand, and then I had to like switch that. It was a nightmare, truthfully. But so what ended up happening is, and moving into the husbandry he's in today, and I'll send you images of it. Um, he is in a 4x2x2 now. And granted, I'm going to be honest, I already want to move him to a 4x2x4. But I'll talk about why. Not that a 4x2x2 isn't bad, or is bad, by any means. I actually see that it is a phenomenal improvement compared to the other one that I had. So the enclosure that I'm using now is from someone locally to me, Camo Cages. Shout out to Bailey. And he's located here in Arizona. So if anybody's in Arizona, he's a great resource. But also, you'll see on the website that I have many other. Okay, so also disclaimer: I'm not sponsored or affiliated by any brands or anything like that. The Emerald Tree Boa site is completely non-monetized, so I don't make any money from any brands or anything on the site. I aim to make this site as completely unbiased as possible, and it's mainly, I want the individual to be able to choose what is best for them. So just in case anybody thinks I'm being like I'm plugging in something, because I did
Bias,
have
yeah.
someone on Reddit say that I'm making money off these enclosures, but I'm not. So just a heads up, everyone.
Everybody's always accusing people of making money.
Right. And I don't make any money from this. I promise. I just love this animal, and I want other people to enjoy them as well. So you'll see on the website that there are some other enclosure companies. So I just want to mention them really quick. That there was Black Box. They just shut down. So thank you so much, Black Box. But they were a big one for housing. So the other ones would be Apex. They're also local here in Arizona, but they do ship. And reptile cages, we have, I believe they ship everywhere, I think. I just started working with them, and we're actually going to be working together to try to create like some sort of guide with their cages or things like that. So reptile cages is another one. So I would pretty much say that Apex and reptile cages and any other. Oh, Tamura Designs is another one, and you got I think Road Ranch or some, or Toad
Toad
Ranch. That's
Ranch,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, you got those. So the main things to look for, and how I upgraded mine. So with my camo cage, is I got no top ventilation. I have slits on the back, and I have slits on the side. And there's a good amount of them. I would say there's maybe like 30 slits in total. So it's not like totally, shut off or anything like that, but it's for sure not this just open, whether it's metal mesh or steel mesh or whatever other variations of mesh there is, that is just like leaking out all the humidity and the temperature. So that has been a huge thing, is changing my enclosure to match, to not have as much ventilation, at least here in Arizona. Now, granted, if you're in a very humid environment, your house is running at like 70% humidity, you can probably run a dubia and be fine.
Mhm.
The people in Brazil and people in Suriname, all their enclosures are outside. So like they have these outside setups, and they're able to run it, and it's perfect for them, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so if you have the environment, by all means, you can do as you please. But the main thing is replicating the environment. So in a dry area, I have noticed that the PVC cage plus minimalizing ventilation, but also allowing aeration within that enclosure, which we'll get into, because you don't want just this stagnant environment. That's very bad as well. Uh, has been very helpful for the dry climate. Now, can you do glass? Of course. You can do glass. I believe Chris Rice, who's, like I said, a very well-known Emerald Tree Boa breeder, has some of his emeralds in glass. And, and many of the old keepers who are keeping theirs in glass enclosures as well. It all just depends on how you dial in your room, your husbandry, and what works for you. So, when you go through the enclosure section of the site, you'll see that I'm not biased towards PVC. I'm not biased towards glass or even plywood or other forms. It's just about, and mesh top or solid top. There's ways to make everything work, and it's best for you to look at your environment, your animal, and if you're going to try glass, by all means go for it. And it just may require a different approach than someone who's running a PVC setup or something like that. So for me, the biggest success has been moving to that PVC style enclosure and minimizing the ventilation without making it super stagnant, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. It's the top ventilation, you will lose a lot. So even just having openings on the side, there's still airflow, but it's not going to be steaming up through the top. So
right.
So you made that move. You went to that, and then what do you think the next logical place to move on for husbandry wise for that specific setup? Like, I'm sure people are wondering how you do lighting now, or if you do lighting in that setup. Maybe we'll go there first.
Okay, so I'll go over heating and lighting next, and I will say that this is going to be a very not controversial, debated maybe would be the topic. So, all right. So before I go into it, I just want to say a lot of the information, if anybody wants to know where I'm getting this and all this, I have the website. It has a references section, so you can actually see where the information is being sourced. So that means, like, if you want to go read the paper, the book, the individual, the PDF, wherever it came from, I always have it referenced. So that way you can kind of go see where this information is coming from. I want everybody to know that whatever is on the site and whatever I'm saying, I'm not drawing necessarily from my opinion. Personally, it's mainly all from talking to many keepers, and the big one is the amount of work that the Facebook Reptile Lighting Group has put into learning more about reptile lighting and heating, which is honestly phenomenal. If anybody hasn't joined that Facebook group, it is a wealth of knowledge. I recommend everybody to go into. And honestly, I just as a disclaimer, you guys may be intimidated at first because it will be a lot of information, but just take it slow and just don't overthink, like, oh my God, I've been killing my animal this whole time or something like that, right? So it's just slow steps, right? So, okay. So as far as heating goes, so there's many ways to heat, right? We have our halogens, we have our incandescents, we have our heat panels, we have our deep heat projectors, heat mats, et cetera, et cetera. So like I said, in my first setup, I was running a halogen and I was running a deep heat projector. Now, granted, at this time, I did not understand the difference intuitively of the infrared A, infrared B, and infrared C, and how that can dictate an animal's behavior. So granted, running a halogen and a deep heat projector, I was kind of covering that band a little bit with being able to provide a wider infrared wavelength for the heating of that animal. And maybe that's why I didn't get as bad as a UVB burn compared to maybe some others who may just have put a UVB in a heat panel, and I'll explain that in a sec. But right now, what I'm running is I have a heat panel from Pro Products, and I have that set to about 84 degrees, and then I temp gun all the spots around. So the snake is actually, if he basks directly under that heat panel, despite it being set to 84, he can actually reach a surface temp on his body of 89 and 92. So he can actually get pretty hot. And then I have all the way down to a microclimate of 72. So from left to right, and there's a bunch of different microclimates like all around there, right? Since I'll share with you a picture of the setup, but it's heavily planted, so I have it, where he can escape all light if he wants to. There's like a dark corner if he wants. But so I would say, and most keepers would probably say, that you can't go wrong with the heat panel route. And the reason is because it's very, very helpful for not drying out the enclosure. It's very helpful for maintaining ambient temps. Now, you will see that some people will say that you can get that ambient temp from just running LEDs. And that's true. You could technically do that. It depends on the temperature of your room, depends on the size of the enclosure, of course. And I think it also depends on where you live. So I would say you can't go wrong with the heat panel route. Now, opposed to, well, actually, that's not true. There are keepers that do use incandescents and stuff like that. I believe Ed Marino is one of them. And what I have learned, and I've been talking with Mariah from Reptophiles and also doing some more information with talking with the company Soul Reptile and using the information from all the fantastic, scientists on the reptile lighting group, that there could be benefits of running a halogen with, our heat panels, depending on the size of the enclosure. That is a very big thing. And so when I say that, I really want to emphasize that importance, because if I'm running, let's say I have an adult emerald in a 2x2x2, I don't allow enough room for this animal to escape that intensity. So I do think there's merit to having a larger enclosure, which is why I said I already see the benefit of wanting to move him from that 4x2x2 to a 4x2x4 to allow more ability for him to, if he wanted to go and experience, infrared A and B from that incandescent or halogen, then he can do that. And then I have the heat panel that's maybe maintaining like the ambient temp over here in a larger enclosure. So what I'm saying is, depending on your enclosure size, you can't go wrong with a heat panel. I do encourage people, though, to, depending on the route that they want to take, maybe not starting off with a super large enclosure, because when you first get the animal, there's going to be so much information that you're going to be learning about. So I want to emphasize that, if you start off with a 4x2x2 or a 3x2x2, depending on the size of the animal, start simple, right? Get your parameters in, and then, maybe you can upgrade that animal into something more intense, right? So, for example, like I told you, my husbandry setup, compared to what I'm running now, it is a little more advanced per se, but I have slowly been learning like how to make things work in my environment. So,
Right.
So I guess once again, just as a summary, heat panel you cannot go wrong with, but I highly encourage people over the course of owning an Emerald Tree Boa to not think that just because an animal is sedentary, that it is not going to benefit from the other aspects of heating. And I know that what we've done has worked, and I'm not knocking that by any means. But one thing that is a value to me specifically, and this may vary from person to person, is I really want the animal to thrive, right? So, and I think being able to do as much as I can to offer this animal as much of an ecosystem as I possibly can with the heating is something that I feel like I want to provide for that animal. So nothing wrong with just running a heat panel, nothing wrong with just running, if you're mounting a deep heat projector and a halogen on top and you're able to maintain the main parameters, the animal isn't being burnt, the humidity's fine, the temps are good, his sheds are good, he's eating well, by all means, you can use those different heating elements. I wouldn't recommend a heating mat. This animal doesn't really benefit from that, so I would avoid that and all. The only time that I use a heat mat could be like sometimes I'll put a heat mat on top of my quarantine tub and like kind of have the heat radiate down. And it actually, in my setup in Arizona, like right now, the hotspot is reading like 85. So with just the heat mat on top. So, and temp gunning the animal, they read about that as well. So it's not just like ambient. But so with that being said, that's what I would say for heating. And I think just encouraging people to understand that the heating aspect, an animal getting hot and the specific wavelengths that the animal is getting are very two different things. And I'll tie that into lighting as well, since this is something I've talked about with Mariah from Reptophiles about, and I'm curious about it. I truly can't say whether this is right or wrong, but it's for sure something I'm going to experiment with, and that's going into UVB. So UVB with arboreals is for sure a heavily debated topic because people have seen many, many UVB burns on their arboreal animals, especially chondros, right? We have seen that, some of these animals are getting that dark navy black kind of burn, or you'll see that they're just sitting in the UV for this long amount of time, and it's actually counterproductive, right? Because they're getting, it's not helping them. So there's not a lot of research on what emerald tree boas actually receive in the wild. Roughly, we're saying between, Ferguson zone 1, Ferguson zone 2, probably at max, right? I mean, and realistically, my assumption is, and based off, how people have gone to the Amazon and see things, they probably, as they go through and they move around, there's gonna be spikes, right? Like they're gonna be, maybe the sun's peeking through there, and then that exact moment, it's like actually like a 2 or a 3, but then they immediately leave, right? So here is a thought that I encourage people to think about, and I'm not saying that this is the definite answer, but it is for sure something that is worth. Actually, I do believe there's been a study done. I don't remember the author. It's somewhere in my website right now, where they measured, UV, temp, and the infrared wavelengths in between these animals, and they changed I believe they kept the temps the same, the UV the same, and they changed the infrared wavelengths that each animal was going to get. And the animals did not behave the same as they did just based off the temp, right? They actually went towards specific infrared wavelengths to actually give them the internal energy that they require, right?
Yeah.
So when we provide UV, and let's say we're all running ceramic heat emitters or a heat panel or a heat pad, all of these things are giving us infrared C, right? Which is a farther wavelength away from infrared A, and it's not as energized. And so this animal may spend time basking under this heat panel, which typically most of us will mount our UV where the heat is. And they're trying to reach a specific threshold of something, but they're never going to get that threshold because that type of infrared wavelength isn't being provided. So therefore, they're going to bask at a longer period of time, which then puts them at risk of a higher chance of UV burn. Now, I'm curious to see if we provide a low intensity UV, whether we're staying in that 0 to 2.4%, obviously above 0, but somewhere in that range, and we provide infrared A, infrared B, and infrared C in a safe manner, allowing the animal to have shade, allowing the animal to have the ability to leave and all this stuff. How would they respond to the UV? And also the enclosure size, right? Because if the larger enclosure I have, yes, 100%, way more stuff to manage, humidity, micro temps, all this stuff, it's for sure not for everybody. But I'm curious to see if that prevents some of the UV burns that we see. And it does change the way that the animal interacts with its environment as well. Because I think a big thing is that some people think that these emeralds are not active, but they truly are active. And I sometimes wonder if it's because we don't give them necessarily. Okay, that's not true, because there are people using halogens and incandescents. But for some of us who only give IRC, would they be more active if they had infrared A and B, just due to how they're going to be able to get the energy that their biology specifically looking for, right? And since they're processing it differently. And I have this written on the website. There's a lot of science that goes in it. I'm trying to skip over that so I don't go off on a tangent. But in just a very blanket like method, I think heating and lighting is for sure a area in Emerald Tree Boas that we have dialed in as far as what works, which is pretty much heat panel or some other type of incandescent, an LED. And our animals do good and they breed and they live long lives. I am for sure open to expanding that knowledge and seeing how the information that we learn from other species and how they interact with things, how that could impact our arboreal species.
Yes, I think that's a good like open-minded approach. And so for visible light right now, do you just have like an LED running on the inside of the enclosure?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh wait, for me personally?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, sorry. So in my enclosure right now, I have a heat panel. I have an incandescent. Sorry, a halogen, not an incandescent, and I have a Arcadia Jungle Dawn LED. I took out the UVB just because I wanted to see when he transitioned into the new enclosure how he reacted first to me adding in, because these are internally mounted versus externally mounted as they were prior. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't like just dousing him in this like intense radiation. I want to add a UV, but I'm going to upgrade the enclosure, and that's actually something I'm going to do with these two that are next to me. Is I'm going to put them in a 4x2x4, and I'm going to do like a full spectrum lighting with a UVA element as well built into the visible light, and see how they react. Of course, I'll be monitoring them, making sure they're all okay. I know it can be a controversial topic, but I'm interested to seeing how I can see how they interact with their environment differently, right? Because building bioactives and stuff like that is actually something that I thrive on. I think I have 10 aquariums here. They're all planted and like self-sustaining, for lack of a better word. And so building micro ecosystems is like something I love doing, and it's so interesting. It takes time and involves this dynamic of not touching it and touching it at the same time. Yeah. So it's like I'm very curious to see. Obviously, I'll let the enclosure establish a little bit before I just throw them in. But I'm going to be experimenting with the UVA and UVB section in a larger enclosure, hopefully within the next few months. But as of currently, in the current enclosure, he has the halogen, heat panel, and LED.
This episode is brought to you by ZooMed Laboratories. I think one of the challenges with providing proper lighting for your pet reptile is the chaos that happens on top of the screen. You have all these different lighting fixtures that are all trying to direct light to the same basking zone, and it can get very chaotic and challenging to make sure the light is all hitting the same area to simulate that homogeneous sunlight that we're trying to replicate. That is why I'm so excited to tell you all about ZooMed's ReptiSun LED UVB combo hood, which was specifically designed to simplify the process by combining high-quality visible light and UVB lighting into the same fixture. This fixture is a combination of ZooMed's industry-leading LED for visible light as well as the ReptiSun T5 high-output UVB bulb that many of us are accustomed to using, all in the same fixture. And personally, I think one of the best features of this hood is the ability to program up to 90-minute sunrises or sunsets with the LEDs that run on a completely separate timer than the UV. So you can simulate your visible light coming from 10% up to 100% of brightness and then back down at the end of the day, and then have that UV bulb click on at some time during the midday. Maybe you only want to run it from 10 till 4, but you want your light to be on from 8 till 8, and simulating that nice ramp on and ramp off that the sun does for us so naturally outside. So if you're looking to offer your plants and animals the best lighting experience and you want to simplify the top of your enclosure and get rid of a fixture so you can have one unit that does it all, I highly recommend checking out ZooMed's ReptiSun LED UVB combo hood. You can find more information on zoomed.com. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I think it's a good mix, and I've actually had the opposite. There's one area where I ran into a problem this winter. This is my first winter in this house that I ran into an opposite problem with my Boas where I was only giving him a halogen, and I think he had a deep heat projector, and it would get so cold in the basement that he was just coiled up underneath the halogen all day, and it wasn't getting warm enough. And then he actually burnt himself, which I had never had happen before. But he was so tightly stacked upon himself that his coil was so tall that it was touching the top of the screen, and the screen was hot. And then he had this little burn. I'm like, where the hell did that burn come from? And then I realized his enclosure is too cold. And obviously I knew it was cold, but I saw him basking, so I wasn't really too worried about it. And it was winter, so things were cooled down. And we were going through a fasting period. But then I added a panel just to bump up the ambient temperature. And he still basks a lot. He mostly basks under the halogens, but it just helped him get to his body temperature to a place where he didn't feel like he needed to be so tightly coiled. So again, it's just one of those, it's a nuanced thing. You got to, balance both worlds. And
it is a very nuanced thing. And so that's why, like, I don't want any keeper to think that I'm saying like, this is the only way. I'm very much, there are some things, of course, that we have to be very specific on, right? Like their humidity and their temps and stuff like that. But I don't want anyone to think that like, it all depends on how you plan on keeping, right? Like, if someone owning just one animal and can like dedicate all their time, which honestly I kind of don't think is a bad thing, because you can really deck out that one animal, right? And so that's a perk. But I do understand, if you have large breeding operations and things like that, space is a thing. But I guess you can get into the nuance of like, okay, well, what's reasonable and what's not, and should we still be providing these animals with like some of these bare minimums and et cetera, right? So especially when it comes to Emerald Tree Boas, where you're not getting like, I mean, here I'll actually look, like if I load Morph Market right now, I think there's going to be maybe like, I can tell. Okay, so there's in the U.S. and Canada, there's 4 animals listed right now. So
really,
so like, right. So just what I'm saying, like, we're not at a scale. Oh, I could see how people are thinking like, oh, we need to scale this up, right? Like we need to have babies provided and all this stuff. And so maybe, getting more and more would allow us to do that. But I think at the same time, it is a good idea to think like, I'm not saying we all have to do this all at once, but like no animal, in my opinion, is like worth saying that we have it all down, it works, and there's no room for improvement, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
Just because something works doesn't mean that necessarily there's not improvements that we can make. And like I said, I'm not knocking anybody's keeping style or anything like that. I just, for sure, am passionate and love all the nuances that come with this and stuff like that. And for someone who wants to be a little bit more hands off, I will say that your animal is going to live beautifully and fine if you dial in your parameters and you're just running a heat panel or things like that. This is just for those who want to do that potential next step.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's dwell on humidity for a second. Obviously, moving to the PVC enclosure with less ventilation helped the humidity, but having less ventilation doesn't give you more humidity. You obviously have to provide the actual moisture. So what? Tell me about the substrate, the water dish, and then just like regular like humidity protocol, whether it's misting or fogging, or what are you doing to keep it where it needs to be?
So when I was back in the old PVC enclosure, the Dubia, I was doing everything. I mean, I was spraying. I added a misting system. There was a time frame where I ran a fogger for about a week, but then I bailed on that because I was like, I'm not taking this risk. And then, I was just trying to do whatever I could at the start to figure out how to maintain this, which in hindsight, I recommend someone do that before you get the animal. I had the ability to be like super involved, but obviously that's still stressful for the animal. So try to get that, dialed in before you get the animal is my tip. But so right now, there's many ways to get your humidity up, right? So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the misting system. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with spraying. That funny enough, there is a controversy not controversy, but like a funny joke that goes throughout the Emerald Tree Boa community. Chris Rice does a fantastic job of showing it, which is like not needing to spray your animals. And, it's like big spray and stuff like that. And so it is a funny joke, and I do find it funny, but do you need to spray your animals if you dial in other aspects? No. And I know Chris would probably say there's nothing wrong with giving your animal a spray here and then. I think the main thing that, the memes and stuff are focusing on is the difference between something that's wet and something that's actually staying humid. And so that goes into the substrate aspect of, if you have a good moisture retaining substrate and you make sure that that substrate stays damp, not waterlogged or anything like that, naturally over time, that humidity is going to come up from the enclosure and is going to maintain the ambient humidity and relative humidity within that enclosure. So I personally use Galapagos substrate. I have had the best success with that. I've tried many other substrates. I'm not knocking them. I even have tried doing my own blend with like, where I try to imitate some of the other ones, right? Like where I'll get like when I, for example, when I was doing my own blend, I would use some sort of Reptisoil or regular soil, and then I would put in Reptichip or orchid bark.
Yeah.
I would put in sphagnum moss. I'd put in, and I also put in horticultural charcoal as well, and I would mix that up, and it did okay. It would dry out faster for some reason. The Galapagos stuff that I use can just maintain the humidity so well without waterlogging. So I'm once again, I'm not sponsored or anything by them. I'm just saying that for some reason that one specifically is this like really nice balance between stuff where I'm at. So I've been using them, and at first when I set up the enclosure, I wetted and really got it like more than damp, and then as the enclosure started to kind of reach some homeostasis with that, and then I do some spraying like every few days, something like that, maybe every every other day, and because right now my humidity in that enclosure stays at about, I think it very rarely drops below like 70 at this point. So, and that's with the current ventilation I have. Now, I also want to make note that I do actually have, I've been running a test where for about 5 months I was running a small, like some small micro fans. I actually just got some ones that are for like a computer, and I just attached them and I ran them to create some like kind of airflow at the top for like canopy. And it and so he shed with that, and it was fine, and I was able to maintain the humidity. So I do see that that is possible. I'm still experimenting with that. I'm actually just turned them off, and I'm after the last shed he did 1 month ago, and I'm going to see how the enclosure is without them. So because I do still want airflow in there, right? I don't want it to be like this stagnant environment where there's just not a lot going on. So I have some micro fans that are able to turn on and off. But my humidity has been pretty maintained. And I also will say, even with the previous enclosure, I think one of the biggest benefits I had to maintaining my humidity, even in the enclosure that was not built for it, was plants.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
Yeah, like plants are such a are so helpful on maintaining humidity. I truly can't stress that enough. Like I have the exact same enclosure he's in right now, and there's I have a tier 2 to my quarantine, and she's in the enclosure, but it's bare still, so it's like paper towel. And it's so interesting because that without all the plants and everything like that, that enclosure dries out still so
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
And I only have a heat panel in there, so I'm not running like ceramic or incandescents or anything. It's just an LED, like a standard LED, and a heat panel from Pro Products, and it dries out so fast. And even the microclimates, like I went through temp gunning, and the variation is like you have that 90 hot spot, 87, but the lowest it goes to is maybe like 78. Versus when I add the plants, I can get as low as 72 in some areas, right? Which is fairly low for an emerald, and I don't really see him spending a lot of time in that area. But if for some reason, like majority of it is from 76 to that range, right? But there is those like a 73 spot or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. So I do think that plants and this is another controversial thing of styles of enclosure, right? Like you have your naturalistic versus your minimal, right? And I don't think one is necessarily right over the other. It's just that for my type of setup, the substrate goes a long way. Now, if you're going to be running a minimalistic setup where you're running puppy pads or paper towels, spraying is important, the ambient room temp is important, and something that you mentioned, having a large water dish
Yeah.
is a big thing. People will put that underneath the hot side, so it kind of like comes up. I don't recommend putting a heat mat underneath that and having it like evaporate, because I think that just makes that you're pretty much imitating a fogger at that point, right? So in a way, not one to one, but like I think that just doesn't allow the air to, not be wet all the time. And I think you potentially could run the risk of doing some sort of respiratory thing. I have not encountered that, and that's not something that's very much documented. But I remember one time I ran a heat mat on the bottom of the enclosure with that just to see how it worked in a quarantine tub. And after like one day, the tub was like all wet, and I was like, I'm not doing this. And so
Yeah.
so I didn't risk it, but I probably wouldn't do that. But the big and typically what people do with the water dish is they'll get like a huge, lasagna kind of like glass thing and they'll fill it up and then that's a huge surface area of water, right? So that's going to help. What I do with mine is because it's a trade-off, but with all my animals, I just buy like 64-ounce like human ceramic bowls and because I can get like 3 or 6 of them for like 20 to 30 bucks versus like a reptile one where it's
Yeah.
like all fancy, but it's 20 for one. Granted, yeah, I mean, I have this huge white ceramic bowl in there, but like I can clean it so much easier. It doesn't have all these crevices. It was more affordable. If I wanted to put it in the dishwasher, I could. So, but it's a big surface area. It's about like that big, and it's deep. It's like 64 ounces. So I have that, and I switch it out. But having a large water dish is a big aspect to humidity. I wouldn't So as far as misters go, nothing wrong with that as well. Just make sure, you're it's not, on all the time. It's just like misters should be supplemental is
Mhm.
I guess the better way. It shouldn't be the main way that you're maintaining your humidity. Like if your mister is fighting to keep the humidity up, then I would for sure try looking at the other things first, right? The ventilation, the enclosure style, the material, your substrate, what do you have in the enclosure, and the heating source. And then, foggers, don't get me wrong, they look cool. Like, you open the enclosure, it's like this mist coming out, and like the snake's all green, and it appears that like such a cinematic moment, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah. And if you go back
but
10 years ago, every green tree python and emerald tree boa keeper was just fogging the shit out of their snakes. It
yeah,
was just like
yeah, no, they
it's
were.
just what we did.
Right. And like I think the thing with foggers is that you just run a lot of risk for it getting dirty and I mean, this even happens with like frogs and stuff, right? So like, the bacteria that can grow in the nozzle and it's in the air and stuff like that, depending on the type of bacteria it is. And then, the wetness of it and the snake is just constantly breathing that in. And
Mhm.
you just risk this chance for a problem. And I think with this species, the more we can do to minimize that, the better,
Yes.
for everyone involved. And then the one last thing I want to say about humidity, because this will be a topic. So there has been a there's been a long time argument for green trees and emeralds of spraying the snake directly.
Mhm.
And so I think like if you go into that with curiosity, which is like kind of how I approached it. If you go into that with curiosity, one of the main things you'll think of is it's raining in the Amazon all the time.
Yeah.
So these things have to be getting wet. But at the same time, that habitat is huge, right? Like the airflow is huge. There's so much happening, right? So these animals can actually dry out and they don't maintain this, right? So if you are in like a quarantine tub, for example, or a minimal setup, I don't spray the snake directly. Now, if it gets wet from like some residual stuff, it's okay, but I don't spray the snake directly if I don't have a lot of ventilation. Now, have I sprayed a snake with it? Like maybe every now and then, I've just kind of given them a little douse. But it is not something that like I actively go out and do. And the reason is because with low ventilation, low like especially the size of the enclosure and stuff like that, it with the snake perching all day, you can have these little droplets that you sprayed on them like wedge in between their folds, and then you just develop the risk of scale rot or other types of fungal things. And so it's not necessarily that spraying the snake is bad. I think it really depends on the enclosure. Like for example, the enclosure I started out with, I could spray the hell out of him and he would
He's
dry
gonna
out
dry
by
out.
the
Yeah.
end. Yeah. So like that was not a problem. But like now I really don't have to do that at all. So
So
I
when
think
you
those are the
mist, like
main.
when you do your daily or your bi-daily misting, are you mainly misting the substrate and then you'll like maybe throw some onto the plants? Like like you said, you're not necessarily avoiding the snake, but you're not intentionally like spraying him down. But like,
Yeah.
what's the pattern? Yeah, like you want to soak the substrate, like moisten the substrate, basically.
Yeah. So like what I do is I spray the substrate. I'll spray like the walls sometimes, like just around, and then I'll also spray the plants, right? So I'll put on the plants, but sometimes what I do with all my enclosures is I'll like, kind of feel the substrate a little bit. And then, if I feel like it's getting dry, I'll come with like a pitcher or something, and I'll just like pour water where like the plants are,
Yeah, yeah.
and then and just kind of like saturate that environment. So there technically would be some dry spots, but underneath, it's there. And I have cleanup crew as well, so I'm sure they benefit from that. The but I try to keep the soil damp. I mean, the top will always kind of start getting brittle, but if I notice that it's too dry, I for sure will go, and like with a pitcher and maybe go around
Yeah.
certain spots. But normally I don't have to do that too much just because of how the ambient humidity is being maintained, right? Like it's never drying out to the point where like if I put my hand all the way down, it's just like a bearded dragon enclosure
Just
or
like
something
sand. Yeah.
yeah. So, but right now I pretty much just do a light spray on the plants, a light spray all around. I'll usually try to avoid him, but sometimes he'll get ricocheted from the spray. And even in my quarantine tubs, right? Like I don't spray them directly. I'll spray the bottom, the walls, or something like that, and I'll usually leave them alone so because they in quarantine, they don't have as much options as things. It's a smaller environment, so that but I typically will not like douse them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a few other things I definitely want to make sure we hit. Since we're on plants, do you want to just mention some of the plant species you use?
Yeah, sure. So there is a plant section on the website as
Okay,
well.
perfect.
So if anybody wants to use those now, as for plants, you can never go wrong with the golden pothos. You can never go wrong with it. Truly one that I feel like every keeper like just can thrive off that one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I use that one. I use a lot of oh, I'm blanking on the name. It's not the Dieffenbachia. It's the how am I blanking on that name? It's
Monstera
similar.
or
No, not the Monstera. It's like a palm looking one. Dracanias.
Tricania.
Like
Okay, yeah,
the I think that's what it is.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah, so I have put those like kind of near the warmer spot, and it always will grow out and kind of fan out, and it creates this like palm kind of look. And depending how you trim it and keep up with it, I don't use the one that has like the giant stalk or like the ones that I try to aim for the more like fern looking one.
yeah,
But
yeah.
this one actually
The
goes up. So
broadleaf or whatever. Yeah,
yeah, so I've had great success with those. Philodendrons, I've had great success with. I know the Dieffenbachias are kind of controversial because technically the sap in them or
it's
the
toxic.
yeah, it is toxic, but obviously these snakes aren't eating it, so I think it's more of like if they break it and then maybe it gets on them and then it gets in them. So use that one at your own risk, of course. I think that's up to the keeper, but pothos, philodendrons. I love the dracanias. I have tried to find specific types of plants that we keep in captivity that we can go buy in like the stores that they have native
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
to the Guyana Shield. They're I haven't been able to find some readily available, at least in my area and around. So if I do find some, I will put those into the website. But they're just specific types of like philodendrons and stuff like that. But I just don't see them readily available for us. Um, so that's why for now, you can't go wrong. Oh, bromeliads is another one. Snakes. Oh, you can't go wrong with ferns
Yeah.
with snakes, right? And so another thing I do is I'll put like some peperomias on the floor so that way it kind of like spreads out onto the floor. So I have that kind of going. And then I just put cork also all around to try to create like little micro spots for the fauna. and the cleanup crew. So there's like, so I think with those are the main ones, but there I do have other examples. Like you can do some type of Hoyas, you
Yeah.
can do some type of Calatheas if the environments works for you, and then some people even like to do mosses, right? I actually haven't experimented much with mosses, but you could grow some moss on some cork or something like that. So you really could, and I think, but your standard plants that you would use, you can't go wrong with.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's great. Maybe just really quick. I don't know if if it's even worth delving into too much, but is there anything? And I know you don't keep any Batisi or the basins, but is there any like care differences that people immediately that stand out between the
So
two?
that's an interesting thing. So with all the basin keepers that I've worked with, there's not much differences.
Okay.
But with that being said, in their natural habitat, technically basins or Batesi is a little more humid than the northerns. Now, we're talking like 5 to 10% when we're already talking about like 90% humidity and
Yeah,
80%
yeah.
humidity. So we're already very high. And I think that's the main reason why we don't like keepers won't see much of a difference because if they're spiking their humidity, they're getting to that higher value. So it's not really like something that I think you would stress about as a keeper when it comes to humidity. But technically speaking, if we're being as technical as possible, in the Amazon basin, it's technically more humid because they're by the river. So
Right.
you could benefit potentially by just having it more humid for them within um, the enclosure size is actually going to matter for that as well. Um, like a standard northern, a big northern, may max out at 6 feet. You may have some exceptions, of course, but like 4 to 6 feet is pretty standard for a northern. While you can get some basins that go 8, 9 feet, right? So
Mm.
I would say there's some benefit to having a larger enclosure, and also, oh, you know what? Something we didn't talk about, which is also important, is the other thing is perches.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so can I use this as a segue to go in?
Absolutely. Yeah, go for
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with the basins since we're talking about it. Since they're more heavy bodied and they're larger, you can kind of go with some bigger perches. But perches are actually a very big thing when it comes to keeping your emeralds. And so why it matters is you'll actually find that despite these animals being these like larger, compared to the green trees, they love now asterisk read your snake, but they love these thin, small perches. So like, you could have an animal that is maybe like honestly greater than an inch like in circumference, and they'll love a quarter to a half inch diameter PVC pipe, for example.
Mm.
And so paying attention to your animal and the way that they perch is very important. If they're not perching in a like that tight coil and they're like kind of drooping, or they're kind of like it's funny. It almost looks like they're kind of disgusted with the perch. It's kind of how it looks. Like it's a sign that maybe that's something that you should look at,
Like
right?
you
So
want to see the like what anyone pictures when they picture a or an emerald tree boa perching. That's what you want to see. That tight, nice
yes,
coil. Okay.
yes. The I guess we haven't gotten into like health stuff yet, which is a
Yeah.
rabbit hole itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But but the your animal's perching behavior is going to be one of your biggest dictators
Okay.
to the overall like mental, physical, and health state of this animal.
Their well-being.
Yes, yes. And so perching is a perch diameter really matters. Having the option for different perches. So there, I typically will start with thinner perches in quarantine and then kind of see how the animal's perching. But in a actual like full-on enclosure setup, you can have some wood in there. You can have what I do is I have from the reptile perch, I have specifically crafted like standard perches that are made from PVC, and I run a half inch, 2.5 inches, and a 3/4 inch. And then within that, I also have like wood and cork and things like that. So he has many different options that you can choose from. And I know Amy I don't have the room in the enclosure, but one of the things she recommends, which I honestly think is worth doing, is soaker hose vines.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, she's a big proponent of those, and honestly, they look fantastic. I actually want to try them for some of the like shower type setups and stuff. But with those, you can also bend those and make those into so many different types of sizes and stuff like that. So that's why I guess going back to the enclosure thing, that's why it's so cool to have a larger enclosure, because you get to experiment with so many different things, right?
Mhm.
Like as long as you can maintain it. But perch size is a big thing. Perch texture is a big thing. Some snakes actually will hate the smooth perches. Some of them will actually really want to have like that roughness or things like that. So you can sometimes, I know sometimes people will like uh, use what's it called, aquarium safe silicon, and they'll add like some stuff on it to make the
Sure.
PVC,
Some
or
there's
they'll
some
like burn
yeah.
it or something like that to kind of give it some grit to it. So there is that. And then obviously mounting stability. I highly recommend that you mount it as firmly as you can, especially if you have a male and a female in the same room. That male will destroy your setup every night. I have that actually in the quarantine room. Like there's two females and a male in here, and every night I like have to come in the morning, and one of the perches is like just destroyed. And I try everything I can to like really get in there while still keeping it removable, but they, I mean, it's a snake. They don't care.
Yeah,
So
exactly, yeah.
they'll destroy whatever. So um, having it removable is nice as well, just because you'll be able to take the animal out of the enclosure without disturbing it.
Yes.
Something I highly recommend. So multiple perch levels is always good as well. And, that way you're able to give it different temperatures. Like I have them staggered in and out of the enclosure, and, kind of forming like an odd triangle with these three main ones. And then the other ones are just spread out. And then obviously, depending on your enclosure, perch hygiene is important. So, if you're, most of us feed in our enclosure. So, if there's blood and stuff all over the perch, and then the animal's like perching on, that's just going to be bacteria that's getting in there. You can also get, if the perch is too big, you'll actually start to see that underneath on the belly of the snake, along the ventricle scales, there's going to be a lot of redness tinting to it, and it's sometimes a sign that they're going to go in a shed, but it's also a sign that your perch may be too big, and it actually is causing some like micro bruising on the snake. So perching is actually very, very important, and can reduce the overall stress of the animal as well, which is important for so many different things.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that was a great tangent to go on. I didn't
Yeah.
really even think about how important that is, and obviously, like you said, if you're keeping basins, you're probably gonna have some bigger perches. The animals are a lot bigger, but the idea is
Right.
basically, essentially the same. Okay, that's fantastic. There's three other real main areas that I want to talk about that I think
Right.
are super important, and maybe I'll let you choose the order. So one is the importation process, and just dealing with an imported animal. And I think that dovetails nicely to the second category, which is health and general. That's another area of Emerald Tree Boas that people, there's lots of horror stories. Animals going off food.
Yes.
The regurg is obviously a big thing in the emerald, or maybe was, and you can speak on that. And then the third one, which dovetails nicely into that as well, is prey, is feeding. So, is there a specific order you'd like to tackle those in?
Um,
Importation, health, or feeding?
I can start with importation. So as mentioned earlier, and I'll kind of segue that into the health because I think it'll go easier that way. So as mentioned earlier, you're pretty much not going to be getting any basins imported. That's something that you're probably not going to be facing, but you will be facing that with Caninus unless you are going with captive bred, which is our northern emeralds. And so how that's pretty much happening is, we have our different importers that bring them in. We have our exporters, and most likely in Suriname or Guyana, the Guyana Shield, honestly. Uh, Most of the time it's going to be Suriname, but they're sourcing it from Guyana. There's probably exceptions. I'm not too familiar with how Central America exports.
Mm.
So that's actually something I just recently started to kind of learn about, because apparently there is some farms in Nicaragua There's some farms in Costa Rica, and I don't know if there's any in Panama. I'm learning about it because, believe it or not, my mom is from Nicaragua and my dad's from Panama. I know I look super white, but
I never would have guessed.
yeah, I know I'm actually Latino as well. So like, I know it throws people off.
Yeah. That's
So I am,
awesome.
yeah, thanks. So I'm learning about that aspect as well, and just trying to see what Central America is. But Suriname is mainly where we're going to be getting them now. All right, so the problems with importing come from the health problems that come with importing are going to be mainly with who you're getting the animals from and where they're coming from. To track down all the way to, the collector, to the exporter, to the importer is probably not worth your time. What really matters more is if you're going to go the import route, it's getting an established importer who you can see actually does some due diligence when they're getting the animals in, because I can't say that importers have to do the best they can with the amount of animals they're getting in, right? But this could be things as like, uh, are they feeding the animal and getting it established before it goes to you? Are they doing some type of deworming or parasite aspect? Is this animal being, what is the facility like, and things like that. And also a big thing is the communication of the importer as well. So I do know some importers that do their due diligence, and I have heard some horror stories, and I have my own, of some people who just don't care,
Right.
and that can really sour someone's first experience, especially when they're not, as familiar. Luckily, my first emerald that I got, I feel so lucky that I didn't go through a lot of this stuff. My third emerald is the one that to this day I'm still going through problems with, but we'll talk about that here in a second. So health problems, yes. Now with importing, this is a rabbit hole, and honestly, what a big thing that made me start the Emerald Tree Boa website was because I wanted people to be aware of this. So just as a quick overview, there is a disease section on the website. This is going to go over diagnostic testing, uh, all the different things that they can get from chronic regurg. Well, chronic regurg technically isn't a disease; it's a symptom, but it's
Right.
a condition. Talk about crypto, IBD, Nido, Ophidian, snake mites, uh, chlamydia, which we'll get into, and I believe those are the main ones. So this is a rabbit hole of a section, and I can go as in depth as you allow me to, because it is truly, honestly, it's very fascinating, but it's also terrifying. So
Yeah. Let's
so
do
I'll,
it.
I'll try to go quick through them
Yeah.
and focus on the ones that matter. So on importing, I personally will say you should, if the importer can test the animal prior to shipping out, and you have the finances for that, that's great, especially if you trust them. You should still swab your animal when they come to you, because anything can happen in between. And also, you don't know everybody's testing process and how they swab and all that stuff. So just because someone swabs at their place, whether this is captive bred or not, I do highly recommend swabbing on your own. And when I say swabbing, I personally go through RAL, which is Research Associate Labs, which uh, shout out to Chad. He's been a big help on setting up a lot of the disease section on the website and working with me on getting that all situated. And I have worked with him, with my ETBs. So you can do oral swabs or cloaca swabs. It depends on what we're specifically testing for. Highly recommend, if you're going through RAL, to just bite the bullet and do these, and I'll go through them. So one of the main like trio of things you'll see on RALs is the Boyd panel, which is it'll test for Nido, IBD, and Ophidian. And so IBD, it is prevalent in boas. It's just going to make sure that the symptoms they get can be stargazing and all this different stuff.
Yeah.
That one's a little more well known in the reptile hobby, and Ophidian is also, I believe it's. I actually don't know what the like commercial name of Ophidian is, but furlovirus, that's what it is. So furlovirus, because I always call it ophidian, but it's primarily in the pit viper world, but it has affected other possible snakes, and so you'll see things like illness, type of. Sometimes you get regurgitation, you'll get RIs and all that stuff. It's a virus, so you'll see that kind of response. I have not encountered those yet in the ETBs, so fortunately. And nidovirus, as we know, is serpentovirus, and we mainly think of that in the green tree python world and the
Yeah.
carpet python world. And it is thought that, like a lot of different species can't get it, but they can. There's has been documented cases of even king snakes getting nidovirus, right? So there's a very well-known researcher, Dr. Stephen
Yeah.
Tillis, who has spent, his pretty much his whole life on this, it seems. And, he does a fantastic job of explaining that, Nido mutates and we don't know everything about it. And so to say that a snake cannot get Nido is not necessarily a true statement. We don't see it as much, but there has been documented Emerald Tree Boas with, I know a couple of people who have them or had them, and they tested positive for nidovirus. And so I don't see it too much as compared to like green trees and things like that. But those are the three that I recommend. If you use RAL in the US, I'm not sure what you guys have in Canada, but or other in other places.
What's the name of that lab again? I just want to write it down.
Research Associates Lab.
Research Associate. Okay.
Yeah, there's that one, and then there's some other ones, but I mainly.
How much does that? How much do they charge to do that triple swab? I guess I'm sure you swab 3 times, or is it just a one swab?
It's one swab for those 3, and it's
okay.
So that panel is $60.
Okay, that's super cheap. Yeah, I was just like trying to find places that are doing that because I would love to be able to promote a company like that. That it's just part of keeping animals, especially at a higher volume, is doing this sort of disease testing. And I'm just looking for people that it would be great to promote something like that. So anyway,
and there is the Healthy Trade Institute. They're doing more crypto stuff. So you can. I think they're like I'm still talking with them, so that logistics still going on, but they pretty much are a like certification for companies and breeders to get to show that they have done the like knowledge to learn about quarantine and all this different stuff. But they're offering testing, and it's mainly crypto and I believe IBD. Okay. So they haven't gone into the Nido and all this other stuff, but RAL does like everything. I mean, when you're filling out your form, there's like 45 different things you can test for. So
wow.
They also do postmortem as well. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. So those are the 3 that will stand out. Now I'll get into the more ETB specific ones. Oh, and I also recommend testing for crypto. They do have a crypto swab, which you can do the serpenta, the serpent variation and the lizard variation. And that one is like $20 for both. So you're already at like 80. And I recommend doing both because even though one says lizard and one says serpent, there is some crossover. There have been snakes and lizards that have tested positive for both variations. Yeah. So just to be like really sure. So I'll get into the 2 more niche ones when it comes to emerald. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Helicobacter, which is just a genus and humans get this as well. It's called H. pylori.
Yeah.
So this one is very much actually not talked about much. And I actually didn't know about it. I talked to a keeper whose snake tested negative for everything, but tested positive for Helicobacter genus. Now, from my understanding, this is a bacteria that we can also get. So theoretically, I am curious to see if antibiotics can treat this.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a snake here that is positive for Helicobacter. He has no symptoms or anything like that, but I do plan on treating him with an antibiotic once he's like on month 3 of quarantine right now. So I just want him to establish more before I stress him out.
What are the symptoms would you expect, like regurg and things like that, like GI stuff? Like that's what you'd expect in humans.
Yeah, so that's the only symptom I've seen so far would be GI things, but I'm curious to see how that transpires in the long run, because like apparently with humans, now of course I'm using humans, but this is the best I got right now, is if we leave it untreated, we can get some pretty nasty GI symptoms, like that happen. So now their digestive system, their microbiome, totally different. Maybe it's negligible, but I'm also curious if that passes to babies
Mm.
because it is a bacteria and because it can spread through fluids. So I'm curious if that can also start. This is just like I'm totally spitballing here. This has no like this is where I'll say there's no like research and this is me just brainstorming. I'm curious to see if that passes to babies and that could also be a reason why some babies have such a problem at the start with eating or other GI symptoms. I could be totally wrong, but I'm curious because typically what it seems like this Helicobacter is coming from, it sources from bad drinking water.
Mm.
So I'm assuming that somewhere along the importation process, they get access to water that has this bacteria in it, or it could just be naturally occurring in one of the areas that they get collected from. And and then the thing is that you have actually I'll say that here for this thought because it'll tie into the next one. So that's H. pylori. I don't have the specific strain, but it's the genus. So I'm hoping that I am going to be running him a antibiotic eventually, and I'll see how he ends up responding and things like that. So that's my own little thing I'm doing. But so there is that one. So that's something that the only reason I'd recommend testing for that because he's actually showing no symptoms at all. Like he's eating fine, he is pooping fine, he's peeing fine, everything looks totally good. But I just wonder what potentially what the long term benefits are of
Sure.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is that one. That one's a little very much understudied. I actually posted in the Facebook group asking like, does anyone ever experience this? And there's pretty much like nothing. Um, so we'll go into the next one, which people are always shocked when I bring it up, but it's chlamydia.
Mm.
And I know people immediately think, funny enough, slight little tangent, but one of my snakes went viral on like threads. Viral, I mean, it got like 3,000 like likes or whatever, but it had like a bunch of comments because I said like I posted it to the wind, just saying like she passed her chlamydia test. I was just talking to myself,
Yeah.
and people were just going like, how can she get chlamydia? Like, what is going on? Right. And just like in shock. But yes, chlamydia is a zoonotic disease. So it does exist outside of humans. There's many different strains to chlamydia, but it is zoonotic. The one that the studies show is the avian chlamydia specifically. And that is the greatest thing that we have currently on explaining what regurgitation is coming from. And
Okay.
so I'll get into regurg, but I just want to talk about the chlamydia first. Is that the assumption is that the exporters, they are also exporting birds from the same location, and some of these snakes get housed in the same area. So if a bird has the chlamydia, then the snake ends up getting it, and then you end up getting this chronic regurgitation. And the reason why we call it chronic regurgitation is because it seems that nothing ends up fixing it. So, and it ends up happening multiple times. And, so as a keeper, you immediately think like, okay, other captive snakes have regurged. Obviously, is this a husbandry problem or whatever? The problem is you could have a snake that's never regurged, and then, if you're not on top of your stuff, then all of a sudden your whole collection starts regurging, which now shows that, you've had these snakes for 7, 8, 10 years and never had a regurg, and then all of a sudden your snakes are puking. So that's a huge thing on showing that, this could be something viral or
Yeah.
something bacterial or whatever. And it seems that avian chlamydia is our biggest
Culprit.
statement.
Yeah.
Yes. And I hate to say it, but it almost is like a controversial topic in the animal community. I think there's a lot of like kind of like mites in a way, like there's shame around it. And it's like because like if you ask someone, does the snake have mites, they might take that personally, like I don't have mites in my collection, but it's like nobody, well, I hope nobody wakes up and goes like, oh, I can't wait till I get mites, right? Like stuff happens, you go to an expo, you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So
I've had people on the show who've got mites when they only have one animal and they've had it
exactly.
for 5 years and suddenly they have mites. It like came in through like, a substrate that, just weird shit like that just pops up.
Right. I had mites on one of these, which I'll talk about here when we get more into health things, but and I treated her. She's fine, but like I don't know where they came from. It may have came from the previous owner, but I'm not sure. So, and that's my only mite situation that I've encountered. And so with the regurgitation, it's a very controversial and almost like shameful topic because you have people come out who want to do good things, right? Like they want to solve regurg is the way that it is. And I think that's like a very noble thing to do and that's nice, but it's a very hard thing to just say like I'm going to go solve this, right? Because you know, you can't just have one example. You can't just have uh like there's so many factors that go into that. Like, you know, let's play devil's advocate. Let's say it's not chlamydia. Okay, so and let's say it's something else. Let's say it's another viral thing, a parasite or something. We don't have a lot of, first of all, research into this and specimens, which is something that I've been actively working with like a couple universities, some people in the UK, and a couple vets on trying to get some specimens that sadly pass before they're frozen to do necropsies on to see if there's anything else that shows up. It's that's slowly been in the background that I've been doing. I'm not claiming, just as a disclaimer for anyone who sees, I'm not claiming I'm finding the answer or anything like that. This is just something out of my own curiosity that I'm doing for the sake of the species. If I find something, I'm happy to share it. I care about the animals at the end of the day. That's all that really matters to me. When it comes to chronic regurg right now, you'll see that a lot of people, the main consensus is we put the animal down as that is the most like humane aspect and also to save your collection. Now, for me personally, I have a very big heart when it comes to animals. I struggle even killing the most basic things in the plant. Like I do not kill bugs, but I even sometimes struggle with killing mosquitoes. So like, you know,
Yeah.
putting in it and mosquitoes suck.
Yeah.
So like if that means anything. So like you have a snake, right, that we took from the wild, and you know, I am adding my emotion to it, but like it didn't ask for any of this, right? And you know, then all of a sudden I'm just putting it down because I'm taking the risk, and you know, everybody has their own way that they're going to go through this, but chronic regurg is for sure something that is very disheartening to the keeper, and this is where you start getting into the import aspect because if it's your first animal and your animal is puking and then you know you have, let's say you have other boas or things like that. I haven't heard of this spreading to other types of boas, but I'm not sure, and I highly recommend that people keep their import away from their collection, like very far away in the best that you can. I'll talk about quarantine process as well because I think that's a big thing, but it is right now with avian chlamydia being the main thing. There is no cure to it. There is no um, solution that we have found. I think the logic is by the time symptoms start showing up, the viruses are or the bacteria or the viruses. I think it's a no, it's a bacteria, I believe. Why am I blanking on this? I think I'm. Hold on, let me make
Yeah,
sure.
actually, I don't even know myself. I'm trying to think. How do they treat it in humans?
I
Is it
think it's a
chlamydia?
bacteria. Well, typically we use in humans we use doxycycline. So it's a yeah, bacterium. Okay, I was right. So yeah, it's a bacteria, and it just becomes by the time it's so spread, it's like too late. And
Right.
and then there's this other aspect that's super important to think about. Whether it's chlamydia, whether it's something else, this animal in the wild may be able to function with whatever it is.
Right.
And then the minute that we bring in captivity, importing, exporting, getting situated, the stress, all this different stuff, yeah, having to adapt now to living in a box and going through quarantine, seeing humans every day, the temperatures not being the exact same. All that could make something that they live with in the wild now become a problem.
Right.
So you also have the aspect that like, okay, you know, maybe it's not chlamydia, maybe it is a parasite or a virus or something, but just the whole process of getting to your room has made this now become a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And as a keeper, you have to now sit there and ask like, what do I do? Like as someone who like someone who has, let's say they have 20 basins, and these basins range from 5 to 40 grand. Do you want to risk killing all those, right? And so I understand how, from a cost basis perspective, you're going like, this isn't worth it to me. Now, and then you have people on the opposite end who want to do everything they can, right? And I think there's, in my opinion, I think there's a middle ground in there, right? Like I think sometimes, you'll have people say that the minute that there's like 2 or 3 regurges, put the animal down immediately. And maybe that was the right route, right? Like maybe that was the right route. But for me personally, I like to try doing things that I can, whether that's swabbing, whether that is going to the vet. And also, that's another thing, vets in this, I'm very lucky that my vet, he travels to South America, he travels to Indonesia, he travels to Papua New Guinea, and he works a lot with these serpents. But, you may have some people who, and I've heard horror stories where they think the Emerald Tree Boa is like a green tree python, and they treat it like that, and they go like they don't even understand that what this animal is, right? So
Yeah.
I understand that, right? And some people are even afraid. I've heard a story where they had 8 vets trying to hold one emerald, and it's like, and my vet like literally just picked her up and had his finger in her mouth with the fangs and everything, and I was like, okay, he doesn't care actually. So
Yeah.
like, which is I'm thankful for that. Shout out to Todd Driggers at Avon Exotics, but so there is a lot that goes into it. So that's why, if you don't want to go through the heartache, the financial problem, the paranoia, please go captive bred.
Yes.
For me personally, I have these imports, and I have like specific quarantine setups, how I have everything. Like I have one problematic emerald that's in this other room that literally has her own gloves, her own hand sanitizer, her own tongs. Like if I do something with her, I don't do anything else with any other animal. Like even with these non-problematic ones, if I'm cleaning up feces one day, I always use gloves and everything. But if I'm cleaning up feces, I'm not cleaning up anybody else's feces. I'm not, doing water changes the day that I do that. Like if I do water changes in this, like I'm swapping gloves. I'm not, I'm not like I'm dumping each one in like a different spot to try to prevent splashback. Like I do my best to try to, I hand sanitize in between each one. And the quarantine process for an import is not just your standard captive bred, like 3 months. Typically what I do is I have my first stage, which shout out to Chris Rice. He has talked to me about this, and he's talked to many other people's about this. So he gets a lot of credit for this, is, doing a 1 to 2 year quarantine before you even start introducing these animals into your main collection. And so, running a 6 month like tub setup, for example, is not, I wouldn't say is out of line, because you can have an animal that's still adapting 6 months into captivity. Right. And then, you can do stage 2, which maybe is an enclosure, but you don't have it all, decked out and it's this giant bioactive thing, and it's still minimal, and you're watching the animal, you're seeing how it's adapting, and it's still far away from your collection, right? So these are the things that also matter. So like, keepers getting into this space is a big thing. Time is a big thing. Being able to be on top of going like with your quarantine stuff. Like I even have like every single snake in here, pick up this one, like has their own paper towel roll. Like I don't even mess with that. And even in my captive bred populations, like, so I have 72 unique species in the house, but including aquatics. Reptiles, I think it's like 30 or something, but or 40 or something like that. But anyway, so even in my captive bred, every one of my animals has their own tongs. Like I don't even mix tongs with my snakes. It's just, for me personally, I'm not knocking anybody who does, but like I'd rather spend $6 on another pair of tongs and not risk this animal like destroying the rest of my collection, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so that's how I view it. Like I'd rather just, I know it's like more stuff to have, but when you're working with the imports and stuff like that, if you truly have a closed collection and it's solid and you've had these animals for like 5-7 years, granted, you can still have some symptoms show up 8 years later. It's happened with Nito and things like that, due to the virus and all this stuff. But to me, it's just worth having the extra diligence of I did what I can, right? And then
Yes.
because I can still screw up. I'm talking about with like a microscopic bacteria, virus, like all it takes is one tongue flicking a piece of saliva onto the top of a lid, and I put that in. I'm not sure, but I at least did what I could, right? So with people bringing in imports, just please be careful. Try to do things on different days. Do the due diligence of swabbing. Swab when they come in, swab 3 months later, swab 6 months later. And you know what? Do a random swab between 12 to 24 months, and you can randomly swab any amount of years, right? It's just because all it takes is just one mishap, right? Especially if you're going to plan on breeding or anything like that, or if you just want peace of mind, all it takes is one oversight, and you destroy your established collection, right? So with these health issues and things like that, chronic regurgitation is our biggest one. I hope over time that there's more effort and energy put into this. I'm trying to do my part. Like I said, I'm not saying I'm trying to solve it or anything. I'm just curious about what we can find from necropsies and things like that could potentially maybe explain something, or maybe we're not even looking at the right thing, right? And it depends on the vet.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, just really quick on the disease front is, of course I lost what I was thinking about. It had to do with regurg. I guess with regurgitation, you can think of, before you put the animal down, just make sure your husbandry is correct as well, right? And give the animal time, because if it does throw up, it takes a long time for this animal to reconstruct its microbiome. It needs to hydrate. Like, don't feed the animal and then a week later try again. Like when I had a regurg, I waited like 1.5 months. I can talk about my story, but honestly, we could probably have our own podcast on that story. Like, and she looks great. Like her head is probably like the size of my hand.
Wow.
She's a huge emerald, right? So that's why when the guy said a pup rat, I was like,
that doesn't make any sense.
Right. I was like, dude, that makes no sense. Like, she could honestly eat like a jumbo rat if she really could.
Yeah, she'd get it down. Yeah.
Right. And so, but this was all by chance that, my vet like thought of this blood parasite. Like, I have a photo of the blood parasite in her blood. And so it's interesting. I haven't talked about it because I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. I don't want anyone to feel like this part you can talk about in the thing. So like there was this thought that like a solution to regurg was we have to feed hairless rats because they can't handle.
I kind of remember this. Yeah.
And so that was like, it's become a meme at this point. But
shaving your rat.
It was that. And then like the logic is that they're eating this type of rat in the wild has a very thin skin line and it doesn't have a lot of hair. So therefore like they come into captivity and the rats we have are like too thick or whatever on the hair and skin side. And then the other thought was like, we got to feed the rats. Like the meme is gluten free. Chris Rice does a great job on that, but but that we need to feed them fruit, right? Like it's because we're feeding them grains, and then that's like making the rats be absolute shit, and then the snakes are puking. Which, I mean, maybe like I'm never gonna say no. I mean, maybe there's one snake that has an allergy or something. Like I'm not too familiar with allergies outside of humans. And dogs and cats, I guess, but. Maybe 1 in 100,000 snakes does have an allergy to it, but I don't think that was like the main solution to regurg. I mean, I could be wrong, but
if you keep bioactive terrariums, then you know that beneath the leaf litter and the substrate and the soil, your cleanup crew is doing the heavy lifting. Springtails and isopods break down uneaten food, they eat sheds, they recycle the nutrients back up into the soil to keep your system from crashing. And the key to success when it comes to having a healthy, strong bioactive system is having a consistent and reliable source of cleanup crew members. And the BioDude gives you 3 excellent options to achieve this. First are their culturing kits, which allow you to grow your own isopod and springtail colonies at home. These are simple, economical kits that come with everything that you need to establish strong colonies in your own home, whether you are restocking current current enclosures that are already running, or you're needing to spark and initiate the cleanup crew in a brand new setup, this is a way you can consistently have healthy, strong crew members that are ready to go to work whenever you need them. Second, if you actually enjoy isopods as an animal like many of us do, then you're going to want to check out the BioDudes premium kits. These kits come with a clean, display-ready acrylic enclosure to allow you to display your colonies to anybody that comes into your reptile room. And third, the team over at the BioDude has put together a bunch of species-specific cleanup crew kits. So whether you're getting a bearded dragon, a crested gecko, a hognose snake, a ball python, you can go to their website and pick up a cleanup crew kit that will thrive within the environment of the animal you are keeping. The bottom line is very simple. If you want to have a healthy, strong bioactive system, you need a healthy, strong cleanup crew to help maintain it. For more information on the cleanup crew kits by the BioDude, head to www.thebiodude.com. Well, it's a fascinating topic, and I'll say the thing that you just told me off air, well, maybe that's something that in a year or so we could follow up on and do a full, like for the listeners, we could do a full episode on, depending on where that goes, because I think, hey, like you said, of course, everybody's going to have their own threshold for when they want to euthanize an animal. But if we don't, and if you can keep them in a space like you are with yours, that's that's not going to damage the rest of your animals, who knows what we can learn from that situation. And maybe 2-3 years down the road, a few people doing that, we can make a headway somewhere. So I would love to expand on that further when you have more information on that, because that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, of course. And of course, like I'm more than happy to talk about it. It's just like, for sure, such a controversial thing that I don't want to put out wrong info.
Yes,
I don't
you need more data. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I will never do something based off like my opinion, of course.
Yeah.
And I would never talk in like a black and white statement as well, because this stuff's way too complex, and we need more time and more people involved, of course.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I want to definitely to touch on prey. I think maybe we can wrap up on prey, just like feeding and feeding regimes. But one other thing too, like when an import comes in, I think, like you said, the testing, I think, is the crucial thing. You walk through all of that. When they do come to you, do you have like a rehydration protocol that you go through to make sure they're up to snuff there, or do you just put them into your quarantine setup and you're fine with, they'll hydrate themselves?
So at this point, I work with a really good importer. So I for sure trust, like, he does his due diligence as well. Of course, you never know what can happen, but typically I don't buy an animal that I see is like absolutely emaciated and dehydrated. I can usually tell at this point. Like when I first started, I truthfully had no idea what I was looking at. Like what was a healthy emerald versus not, right? So at this point, like I typically will buy an animal that has taken like 5 to 10 meals. It's actually established,
like stateside, basically.
Yes, on the state side, on the importer side. And so, but with that being said, if I were doing something like from scratch, first time, and I don't know, I would do the very basic things. Like I would soak them for, maybe like 30 minutes to an hour. I would do a quick dawn soak to try to, hopefully there's no mites, but, and even that we've used dawn for so long, and that's like a go-to thing. I know there has been some study about it drying out snakes and causing dehydration. I haven't read too much about that, so I can't say whether that's yes or no, but I guess I'm saying that more just to be careful if you are using it, because it could dehydrate your snake apparently. And but typically now when I have a quarantine set up, I typically will everything's already situated. I kind of just, when the animal first comes, I do a quick inspection, look over things, and then I drop it into its quarantine setup, and I don't screw with it unless I need to spray or something like that. I typically don't mess with the animal when it first comes in, like especially because it's just going through so much. Mm-hmm. I typically will let the animal eventually realize, this might be hard to make sense if it's your first animal, but I can kind of tell when an animal stops thinking I'm sus all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You can read his body language, yeah.
Yeah, like the guy next to me when he first came here, I might as well have been like an alien. Like, the way he looked at me and the way he acted, he never really struck at me. But, and that's another thing, like I'm fortunate, but none of my emeralds strike at me. And maybe we could talk about that too, about the like whole aggression thing, because as I mentioned, I free handled them all. but he's never struck me. I mean, he's for sure sussing me out, right? He's like, "What are you doing?" But like over time, I've by not forcing myself onto him, I can tell that he, at least now when I open up the tub or something, he doesn't immediately turn at me, right? Now it's just kind of like I see him wake up and I just see like, his eye maybe move or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I mainly don't mess with them. As far as hydration goes, when I first started this, I was I would be lying if I wasn't stressed out of my mind about hydration, right? But with how I have my quarantine setups now, I don't really see them getting dehydrated. I have a large water dish. These animals are capable enough to find the water if they need to. I also spray the sides of the enclosure, so like if they are animals that drink from droplets, they will have access to that. And like I mentioned, I use a heat map, but I've also used a heat panel as well, where I just put a heat panel on top
Mhm.
of the enclosure, and that has worked without melting anything. These are Sterilite tubs that are. I have the waterproof ones. I don't think it really matters, but I have those just so it keeps in humidity more, just a
Yeah.
little bit. But with how they're set up and how minimal I open and close and I just leave them in the room that they're in, they're not really drying out or anything like that. And also the way that I feed my emeralds, which I'll get into the prey here, I guess is a good segue, is the rats are defrosted in water as well.
Mhm.
So they will be getting a good amount of water from that, but of course they also can supplement as needed, right?
Yes,
So
yeah.
and Chris Rice made a video about this recently. He's always posting memes about hydration and stuff, so that's why it's such an easy reference. But that and most keepers will see this, that once your husbandry is dialed in, the animal won't drink as much, just because like it's being able to retain the water that it's
Yeah.
drinking, and with the humidity. So
And it breathe like the water micro droplets end up on the in the mouth from just breathing the
yes,
air, right? They ingest a lot of
exactly
water that
right,
way.
exactly. So there's so many ways, but at first, but I'm not against like, rain chambers or anything like that. I think that's great enrichment, extra hydration. I will say they do drink from running streams. Like I will have sometimes I have videos of it where I've turned the mister thing to where it's like a stream and I've just kind of held it and then the emerald's just like drinking from it. So I have
Yeah, yeah.
videos of that. Um so I just kind of like over time have established like a regime with them. But going back to the prey thing, so I always defrost in water. And I actually just made a post about this on the Facebook group because I actually, funny enough, a lot of people have been having issues with their snakes eating recently, which is another thing that happens with imports. You'll see that a lot of people will have issues getting their animals to eat in captivity. So I can go through that really quick. So here's what I do. And I'll talk about the troublesome ones in a second. But the standard ones, the ones that like, I come in with a prey item and they just take it, and it's like you're super thankful that no one's giving you a problem. I defrost it in water for however long it takes, and then like 30 minutes before feeding, then I'll switch it to like boiling water and I'll get it hot. And then once the prey is, I'm assuming probably like when I used to temp gun it, between 95 to like 105 degrees, I can just come and then the ones that'll take it, they'll just take it, right? Now, the troublesome ones, which typically are imports, here are the different things that I've learned and have talked about, and many other people have also talked about. On importation, I think these animals are not obviously used to eating frozen thawed prey. And opposed to like our other captive bred animals, we have it where we just, are using water to heat it up or whatever other method we're doing. But I've noticed that these animals need the prey to be like 115, 130 degrees. Like these things need to be hot.
Mm.
So what I've done is like I go through the same process I just described where I defrost in water and I put it in boiling water. But right beforehand, I'll blast it with a hair dryer. And then I'll temp gun it, but like make sure that when you're temp gunning it, you're not just reading like the last heat that was on it. Like I try to hold it for a bit and see what it like kind of stabilizes at. And I'll try to get the head to be like 125 to 130 and then the body like 115 to 120. And then I noticed that all of a sudden the animal that wasn't interested in what you were giving it is now interested in what you're giving it.
Mm.
So the heat of that prey item is is really important. And honestly, not that, not everything we can just assume based off like appearance, but these animals have amazing heat pits.
Yes, they do.
So
Yeah.
so they are very heat sensitive. So I assume there's some correlation there. And now sometimes you'll see that when you do that, it's still not taking it. And what I've noticed from that is, so like one of the girls here, the one that came with me with mice, she came to me super super skinny. Like I'm not to the point where it's like emaciated and it's like you're looking at a horror story, but we're maybe a few months away from that kind of situation. And I mean, she had mites, so maybe that added to the problem, but pretty much she didn't eat any frozen thawed or live rat or mouse. She only ate chicks. And it had to be live chicks, which honestly I hated that process because that was horrible to watch that happen every time.
Hmm.
But I was like, okay, after I had her get established with me, like she had three live chicks, and I was like, okay, at least you're eating with me, right? And so then I tried moving to frozen thawed. And so what I did is I soaked the rat. So I started with a smaller rat. I started with a weaned rat, and I soaked that rat for like the 4 or 5 hours I was defrosting in with a small quail. So hopefully that kind of like masked some of the scent. And then I put the boiling with the quail again, and then I blasted both of them in the same bowl with the heat, and I then rubbed the quail like all over the wean rat because that was like the last thing she was eating. Technically, it was chicks, but I couldn't find frozen thawed chicks, so I was just going off the quail. And so at first she wasn't taking it from me, but I've learned that some of these emeralds do not like. Okay, these are the picky eaters, the ones that are like throwing a fit. Do not like when you hold the prey right in front of their face.
Yeah.
Sometimes like you have to come from like the bottom, or sometimes you have to for some reason like I'll have to like act like I'm walking on the PVC, and then
Yeah.
it's like and
Yeah.
then it looks at it right, and then like I have to sometimes I have to do like a jetting motion, and then I have to slow down as if I'm like the prey item, like thinking about what I'm gonna do next, and then sometimes I've had it where she'll only take it if her head is on the floor and like the prey item is here, and then she can just like gently latch. I hate when they do this, but when they gently latch onto it, and then like I'm going through like, do I shake it? Do I not shake it? Like, what's gonna right? And so I'm like trying to like trigger the coil, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've had to try many different things with her. All five of them, all 6 out of 6 of the frozen thought feedings, I've tried a variation of what I've said. I'm successful so far, but and it has taken me time. Like it has taken me like 30 minutes of me going back and forth doing the hair dryer. So, and trying and then the prey starts drying out, and then I'm like, this sucks. And so I've fought. And then when she takes it, I sit there and I don't move. I don't even put the tub back on. Like
Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm like
Just
waiting till it's
halfway down.
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I'm just like, please, just I'm not even moving. Like I've actually crawled out of this room before, like so kind of thing of not trying to ruin
Disturber.
anything.
Yeah.
And some of them I haven't had this, but some of them I've heard can do drop feedings, especially if they're like really unsure of you. Typically, I've noticed that if you're doing a drop feeding, it just means the animal isn't comfortable around you because when
Yeah.
it's right, right. So there's that, and then also I feed for the ones that eat from me very well. I can feed them at any time of day. I fed at night, I fed at day, but the troublesome eaters, I only feed at night. And I
Yeah.
mean like I'm talking 10, 11, almost 12 a.m. that I'm giving them food because they're up at night, they're active at night, and that's the time where I've noticed that they actually can give me a better response than if I did like 4 o'clock in the evening or something like that. So for people who are, and once again, you can give rats, you can give mice, you can give quails, you can give chickens. I think the controversy around the prey type kind of comes around if if your animal is only able to tolerate one type
Mm.
versus another. And I don't have, and a lot of us, well, maybe some of us do. I shouldn't say that. There's no hardcore data on that, but the thought process is that like if your animal is only able to handle chicks or quails or something like that, the thought process is why can't it handle a rat, right? And it's like does that mean there is something going on in the microbiome? And maybe you're masking the potential that this animal does have regurgitation disease, and you're just scooting around it by doing like if you have a 6 foot emerald and it's only taking small quail, and every time you give it a rat, whether it's weaned, small, or medium, it's puking. It's like, okay, are you actually just not triggering the regurg by using such a small prey item
Right.
when you really do have it? So, and that's a nuance that I think is worth like, and this is something that I think happens in any hobby, but it's like nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but the idea that you may be wrong or your animal is sick or something like that is such a disheartening thing that I think, people can become defensive about it. But in reality, like, I think if we just meet it with curiosity and really focus on, at the end of the day, like, each one of us didn't wake up and say like, oh, I can't wait till my emerald pukes and I have to put it down, right? It's
Yeah.
No one's excited for that. But I think being honest and taking the time to, troubleshoot it and not just go like, oh, it works on quails. Like, I don't have to, I should just ignore this, right? Or whatever. Like, because if I look at it, I'm going to be stressed and stuff, right? But it's like, that's part of why the species is so complex, is because the rabbit hole of problems is so large that it can immediately dishearten someone. But the more honest we are about it, and the more open we are about it, then the more we can set up people for success and not like gatekeep information or things like that, which was originally the whole goal of the site, which I don't know if you want to talk about the site at the end here, but
yeah, I think this is like a perfect wrap up. Like just that speech was perfect, and maybe we can just and I will say too, like we'll talk about the website just to wrap up here. But for anybody that's listening and say, oh, I wish we would have expanded on other things. The website has a ridiculous amount of information. So if you want to like understand how the quarantine tubs are put together or any of that stuff, like it's all there. So, but yeah, please, like just lead into what you were saying. That was the premise of creating Emerald Tree Boa or emeraldtreeboas.org was to give that access to information.
Right. So, and I guess, yeah, to kind of summarize the journey to the website, right? Because so this website started in December of 2025. I started it with the goal of just being able to put readily available information into people's hands, right? And as I mentioned, this is not anything profit. There's no like underlying motive or anything with this. It's truly just, this species deserves a lot of love and care, since there's so much misinformation about it, from the regurg to the defensiveness to the they are complex, but even how complex, and the importing and all this different stuff in it, and it's scattered all over the place. And that's not a bad thing by any means. Like, you have your very well known established people in this community, and they are a wealth of knowledge, and the site was never to take away from that, but it was more for, honestly, if it helps them not have to repeat the same thing every time. And also just the aspect of, not everybody knows that, right? And like, because just as using my anecdotal start off of, I started off and I couldn't find anything, right? And so, and if it wasn't for Amy hopping on a call with me to double check some things, like, someone may not know that Amy exists or know that Ed Marino or Chris Rice exists. And if I can just get a compilation of information that is out there that isn't necessarily my opinion, but more community and evidence-based driven, then that was the end goal, right? So I started this impulsively in December of 2025, and I just hyper focused on it for like 2 months and literally did nothing else. And we're where we are at where we are today because of that. And I truthfully have to say that this has not been done alone by any means. This has been done through so many individuals in the community and so many people who have been working with me. So, and I'll give them a shout out at the end of everybody, that because they deserve the credit. And I never want to be the one that, dictates this, because I'm not. There's so many informative people out there. But if you go to the website, how it's broken down is you'll see that there's a species tab. So you can read about the northern emeralds and the Amazon basins, and how, there's pictures of the different like variations and not morphs, but that's the best way I can put it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have 2 sections split up for the northern emeralds and the Amazon basin. So you drop down those tabs, and both of them have in-depth information on enclosures, heating, perches, humidity, ventilation, lighting, substrates, plants, feeding, hydration, shedding, quarantine, and cleaning. And that goes for both species. And then, of course, as we talked about with the disease tab, there's a bunch of disease information on there. And then I have 2 tabs for the ETB breeders. So that's for Basins and Northerns. And then for anybody who has an emerald, I have a gallery section, which I just added a few months ago, which is, people can send me pictures of their emeralds. And then I have them on a giant wall of everyone's different emeralds with their names and the names of the animal. And then if you click the image, it can send you to the person's Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And, so I'm happy to credit anybody where credit is due. And it's just a way for people to see all the different variations of emeralds that are out there. Like,
just looking at it right now, it's really amazing.
Yeah. So despite being just a green snake, there's so many little differences that can show up between, just localities to the where they're sourced to, the bloodlines and the different types and the age and whether it's a basin or a northern. And, there's whether it's sourced from Guyana, Suriname, some of them are coming from Peru, and even in Brazil, granted, we don't get anything from Brazil, but within Brazil, there's even variations. So their basins have this bluish tint that we don't have a lot here in the States. So, there's a lot of variations within these animals that we still, have yet to learn. And as people keep these emeralds for 20, 30 years, we'll see even how they age, right? Because snakes change over time. And of course, there's a resource tab. There is a blog tab. I think I only have 3 or 4 blogs at the moment. That hasn't been a focus, but I think the main topics are actually regurgitation, aggressiveness, and food refusal. So I think those are the 3 I did just because those are the most talked about things, and especially when it comes to Emerald Tree Boa aggressiveness. But yeah, that's pretty much what the website, I don't know what I was going to say there, but the website, I think I was going to say website, but the website is set up for. And is it cool if I shout some people out?
Absolutely. Please do. Yeah.
Okay. So with building this website, a lot of people have been involved, and some of the major contributing organizations, Mariah from Reptiles, her and I worked together on setting up the Emerald Tree Boa care guide on the Reptile site because it wasn't there before. So I'm very thankful for her time and her knowledge. Ral at Research Associates Labs for the disease information. Responsible Reptile Keeping, Dubia, has also been part of supporting this movement. Apex, Galapagos, the Bio Dude, and Cages. And I'm working with the Healthy Trade Institute currently to see what we can offer there for potential breeders and things like that. And obviously all the individuals in the Facebook group that have reached out to me. You have early on a lot of people who helped. We have, Ed Marino, we have Chris Rice, Amy from Happy Basins. We have Daryl, we have Damien, so many other people on the Instagram as well. Some of the keepers in Brazil have been helpful with the basins since they are actually over there. Basins are all over the place in Brazil. Sadly, we just can't export them, but that would be honestly really cool. But yeah, just so many individuals have come together. And if I missed your name, I apologize, but there's truthfully so many of you, and I'm very thankful. And like I said, anybody wants any resources, please feel free to click the references tab or reach out to me. How I have it set up is the emeraldtreeboas.org website. That is the main source. There is a contact page, but you can also message on Instagram, Emerald Tree Boas. That is the handle. And then you can message that one, or you can message my personal animal one, which is Z Vivarium. That's where I have all my personal animals and my own stuff. So that one is not as educational. I'm just posting what I have and, the different things I go through personally. But the Emerald Tree Boas one is where all the information is. And if you have ETBs, send it to me. I'm glad to post you with credit and all that stuff. It's mainly just to get that out there. And I honestly can't thank everyone enough for being so supportive with the website. I was blown away, when I started this in December, how much it was a supportive thing. And, even in the Facebook group, when sometimes I'd update a section and the battles that would happen in the comments of what was right or not, I I took everyone's thoughts and put them in a way that was universal, right? So like I think everybody has, especially the long-term keepers, has information that is valuable to when it comes to the species. And I never want to step over anybody's toes or anything like that. I think the more the community works together, the more we can all focus on what really matters, in my opinion, which is the animal and the health and the long term of the species, right? Because the species is still so niche compared to some of the others, and in my opinion, it's truly about the animals at the end of the day. And if we can make them thrive, and keepers, and if keepers start thriving as well with keeping them, then we demystify this aggressive ETB that I have a video. I don't recommend anyone doing this, but I have a video of me like kissing one of mine and all that stuff, right? So I took that risk, just saying, but and I don't do that all the time, but I just wanted to show that, like, I have so many photos of me free handling and them wrapped around my head. One of them looking at me like this. Of course, I could have gotten bit, but like I said, they're slow and methodical with what they think. So typically, they'll tell you before something happens. Typically, so
yeah.
But yeah, I can't thank everyone enough. And of course, if you have any other information, like I said, this is a niche species. If you have emeralds that you have some history with regurg, helicobacter, crypto, etc., like, please reach out to me. If you want to remain private, I'm more than happy to keep you private. I understand how controversial it can be, but any information is important because we put these animals down. Not everyone does a necropsy due to finances or availability. And, it's wasted information that we could be using. And I do have connections with people willing to do necropsies and testing and things like that. So once again, I'm not saying I'm just going to solve this or anything, but at least as a community, we can come together and see what else we can find out, which to me is important. So
yes. Absolutely. I mean, I think it is really remarkable what you've been able to pull together. And I know that was one of the things about having you come on is I think you were sort of worried about people thinking that this was all you and that you didn't want to take credit for people's work. And I think, you should give yourself credit because not everybody can put together a website like this. I'm sure the old school keepers who are helping you build this would say that as well. Like you said, they probably answer the same question a million times a year. And just to have a nice website where people can go get that information is probably such a relief for them. And just to have that knowledge get out there. And so props to you for putting all of that together. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all this knowledge. Clearly you have a ton of knowledge yourself, and it was fantastic to hear all of that. And it's just great to see this side of Emerald Tree Boa, especially coming off the back of the green tree python stuff. And it's interesting how different like people who are outside of the hobby will confuse those two species all the time, but it's interesting to see how different they actually are. And there's like a different personality with that species. And I don't mean the personality of the snake, but there's like the personality of the experience, I should say, of keeping them. And they're a remarkable species. Like I said, they're an iconic species. And thank you so much for sharing all that. I would love to have you back on at some point in the future when we have maybe more of that regurg information. And just in general, I think we could definitely do another 2 hours on emeralds. Like there's lots of different things we can go into. So thank you very much. Please let everybody know the website again one more time and the Instagram handles for both.
Yeah, emeraldtreeboas.org is the website, or emeraldtreeboa.org. I both redirect. And then the Instagram is Emerald Tree Boas. And then my personal is Z Vivarium.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Zion, thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Zion, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and sharing all of that incredible information and actually just doing the work to accumulate and build such a thorough resource. I think it's fantastic. Again, as I've said many times, the Emerald Tree Boa is almost as, if not as iconic as the green tree python. I don't know what it is about reptile people, but green snakes, no matter what we do, they really do hold that special place in our heart. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode, even if you didn't or don't plan on keeping Emerald Tree Boas. I'm sure you got a lot of great information from it because so much of that is transferable to other animals as well. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do that over at patreon.com/animalsathome. You can find more information on the podcast at animalsathomenetwork.com. You can comment on the episodes on YouTube or Spotify, and I never say it, but you could subscribe to the YouTube channel as well because that does help me grow and help continue to keep the lights on in this room and allows me to continue producing great episodes like the one we did with Zion today. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you in the next episode.